Well, good afternoon, Corporations Committee. Welcome to our interim meeting. We do have 4 bills before us on the agenda today. Before we start roll for people out there listening and for the edification of the committee, let me make sure we're all aware of the order of bills. We are first going to take up House Bill 91. Then we will move to House Bill 75 around 2:15. Then House Bill 39, hopefully around 3 o'clock. And finally end up with House Bill 72 around 4 or 4:30. So the first bill up today will be House Bill 91, removal of unenforceable property covenants. If you want to get that ready, please welcome our one of our newest staff members. Corporations Committee has a new staff secretary. Her name is Barb Austin, and she will be calling the roll.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Blackburn.
Here.
Representative Clausen.
Here.
Representative Clifford.
Here.
Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Ayer.
Here.
Representative Hunt.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Present.
Representative Roscoe.
Here.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here. I'm glad everyone made it this afternoon. And committee, my apologies up first. You'll notice you'll be seeing me on 2 screens as I am in our committee room here in Cheyenne, and it's voice activated. So you get to see 2 sides of me all day long every time I talk. With that, first bill up this afternoon will be House Bill 91, removal of unenforceable property covenants, brought to us by our very own Representative Duncan. Representative Duncan, if you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 91 is the removal of unenforceable property covenants. Now, to preface before I walk through this bill, it's really simple. It's short, but to clarify any misunderstandings, this bill is directly related to fair housing. So it has nothing to do with easements, anything along those lines or anything like that with covenants. It has directly to do with unenforceable fair housing covenants. So as this bill provides a procedure for removing those unenforceable restrictive covenants for real property and provides immunity from civil liability for those property owners who exercise their rights under this legislation. So if you want to go ahead and move on over to page 2, on lines 2 through 10, we spell out that any person or a representative of an owner, such as an attorney, title company, may record a new instrument that will remove restrictive covenants that are defined in lines 12 through 17. These are either unenforceable via the U.S. or Wyoming Supreme Court ruling as it's in direct violation of the Wyoming Fair Housing Act, which is identical to the Fair Housing Act. Federal Housing Act. Line 19 through 22 is the immunity from civil liability if a person is acting in good faith. Moving on over to page 3, lines 1 through 12, we specify who is not immune to the civil liability, and that would be the first someone representing or attempting to represent that these covenants are valid and enforceable, or someone who honors or attempts to exercise the enforcement of these unenforceable and prohibited by law covenants. Lines 14 through 22 and continuing on over line 2 on page 4 requires a statement on the documents confirming that the covenants are unenforceable and are in violation of both the federal and the state Fair Housing Act. Now, this is where my amendment that I distributed to everybody, this is where that amendment goes in. On line 16, after conveyance, we would insert which violates Wyoming Statute 40-26-103 through 40-26-109, which is the Wyoming Fair Housing Act. This amendment clarifies that not every document sent for recording has to have this statement on the cover page, only those documents that have unenforceable restrictive covenants. And that also references fair housing is what that is. Then we have on page 4, outlines the process for the filing of the new instrument and what must be included. Line 16 through 20 and continuing over to page 5, line 1 through 12, it must include the title of the instrument, which has the restrictive covenant, such as Happy Hallows, Homeowners Association covenants, the name and mailing address of the person filing the new one, the name and the mailing address of the owner, the legal description of the property, and a clear reference as to what is being stricken. And then finally, in conclusion, on page 5, lines 14 through 17, that directs the county clerk to record the new instrument. And that's it.
All right, committee, any initial questions for Representative Duncan? Not seeing any. With that, Ms. Urbikite, welcome to the Corporations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's wonderful to have you back as chairman again. Committee, I'm Lori Urbikite, representing Wyoming Realtors, and we are in complete support of this legislation. I wanted to just give you a quick background, a little history lesson on how we got where we are and how these things came about and why we want to correct the situation currently. Back in 1917, there was a Supreme Court case, Buchanan versus Worley, that the Supreme Court upheld unanimously that municipalities, that cities and towns could not, through their ordinances or their zoning practices, racially restrict home ownership. So but it was only applied to municipalities and to their local ordinances. So what happened from then until 1948 was an explosion of these racially restrictive covenants that were done between private individuals per se. I mean, it was homeowners groups. And so those flourished and were actually encouraged by the federal government for quite some time until 1948. And in 1948, there was a case, a Supreme Court case, Shelley versus Kramer. And in that case, the Supreme Court said, while these restrictive covenants are not per se illegal, the state courts cannot enforce them because it is a violation of the 14th Amendment, the Protection Clause. So at that point, all of these covenants became unenforceable, but they continued on. They continued on throughout the United States. And again, with the encouragement of some of our federal housing organizations that did the lending. There was one statement in a FHA document that said that these types of covenants help keep the wrong kind of people out of our neighborhoods. So it was encouraged for quite some time, even though since 1948, they were no longer enforceable by state courts. Then in 1968, the Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act passed. And part of that was the Fair Housing Act. And that legislation was very specific that said discrimination in housing is prohibited, period. It's prohibited in advertising, it's prohibited in lending, it's prohibited in rentals, and the practices of redlining that had been going on through lenders, quite frankly, was ended and it was deemed illegal. So in 1968, no further of these types of restrictive covenants were legal to be included in those kinds of documents. However, they still exist because they're on the deeds. They're filed with the homeowners covenants. So there are racially restrictive covenants in the chain of title all across properties across the United States and here in Wyoming. And I know a lot of, when we first started talking about this, people were a little surprised at that. They were really, we don't have those in Wyoming. Oh, yes, we do. And the first time I was aware of them was many years ago when I was selling real estate. And there was one in a county from the south center of the state that specified when people of color could and could not be on the property. They could not be there before sunrise and they had to be off the property at sunset, and they had to use a rear door to access the property. Those covenants, those types of despicable language still exist in our documents all across Wyoming today. So this bill, as Representative Duncan said, it creates a method to end that ongoing chain of title. It doesn't erase the historic documents. Those documents are part of our history, good, bad, or otherwise, they are there. And it does not erase those historic documents, but it does end the perpetuation of the racial discrimination verbiage in our land records. Now, the Wyoming of Realtors, we currently provide all of our members with standard forms, contracts, buy-sell agreements, listing agreements. We have a library of standard forms that we provide for our members. I spoke with the president of the Wyoming Realtors last night, and he assured me that indeed, if this bill becomes law, we will immediately work on developing a very simple one-page form that can be provided to the title companies, that can be provided to buyers and sellers and property owners, so that they could easily, I think in Virginia, they call it a certificate of release, so that these ongoing records could be stopped. And I have visited with the title companies. They were concerned about the language on page 3 that Representative Duncan referenced. It was never our intention to have put this on every single document, only those documents that have the racially discriminatory or restrictive covenants. So with her amendment, they felt much more comfortable with the bill. It really is a very simple concept. There are several other states that are working on similar legislation. Virginia is who we copied ours from. We didn't take it word for word. They had in their language that these documents had to be recorded for free. Our recording fees are so minimal in Wyoming, we saw no reason to include that. So the standard recording fees would be required. But that is our explanation of the bill. Again, we are completely supportive of it, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks. Questions for Ms. Urbakite? Ms. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna ask your indulgence to have a quick little privilege here. I forgot to tell you why this bill actually came to existence when I introduced the bill, if I may.
Sure.
It'll be
And we'll
really
see if Ms. Urbakite wants to agree with you at the end. Go ahead.
It'll be really quick, I promise. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I was sitting at a closing table with some buyers and sellers. And for those of you that don't have a lot of interaction and a lot of exposure to this process, you're sitting at a closing table. And back then we had buyers and sellers at the same table. Nowadays we don't. They typically come in at separate times. So I'm sitting there, and one of the things that happens is the title office gives the prospective buyer a copy of the covenants for them to read through and then sign off on that they understand it, they received it basically, and they know what's expected. Sitting there at that table, and all of a sudden, as we're reading through, and the buyer gets this face on them, and I start reading what they're looking at, and we're both horrified that the exact explanation of an example of what Ms. Urbakite talked about was exactly in my the covenants here, just up from my office. And we were thinking, gosh, really? I had no idea that this existed. I went on about my business because I tried to get it changed, and I was told, no, they're just unenforceable. They don't mean anything. You know, you can't enforce them anyway. So I tried, I went on, and I thought, well, maybe we'll do some sort of proclamation to try and make a statement. And that really didn't do anything and didn't go any further. And then all of a sudden I become a legislator and realize, oh, I get to make the laws. I get to make those changes. So that's how this bill basically came to fruition, that someone else brought it to our attention, and then I was reminded of that uncomfortable situation. So it's purely voluntary, is what I want to also reiterate to our committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Ms. Urbakite, that was technically a question to you. Does that sound like things that realtors are faced with in Wyoming, and that story is somewhat ubiquitous across the state at times?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and I will take it one step farther in agreeing with Representative Duncan. We had a private citizen come to us, and I believe she is going to be on the Zoom and hopefully will be able to testify, that talked about her experience and that how this happened to her in Cheyenne. So you'll hear from her, I hope shortly. I hope she's on the Zoom. She brought it to the Cheyenne Board of Realtors, and they invited me to sit in on that presentation. And at that point, I said, "Oh, absolutely, we will get behind it, and we will see what can be done as far as legislation." So, yes, Mr. Chairman, I would agree with Representative Duncan on that history lesson.
Further questions for Ms. Orbekite? Is that Representative Blackburn? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Orbekite, I'm just wondering, back in the day when Judy and I had our real estate company here in Cheyenne, the title companies would black out that offensive language that was in the covenants. Did they stop doing that, and when did they stop doing that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn, I don't know when they stopped doing it. We'll have to ask a title agent that, but the experience that you're going to hear from the private citizen that brought it to our attention was, no, it's not only not blocked out, it is highlighted, and they were asked to sign or initial that they understood it was there, but unenforceable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, Ms. Orbekite? Not seeing it at this time, Ms. Orbekite. I'm going to turn your camera off, but don't leave the room. And if we need to pull you in later, we will. With
Thank
that
you.
committee, let's go to Ms. I'm going to butcher it, Phoebe Nesseth. Welcome to Corporations. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Phoebe Nesseth, and you were correct. I'm the Senior Manager of Government and Public Affairs for the Community Associations Institute, representing 73.9 million Americans living in more than 351,000 community associations in the United States. Since 1973, CAI has been the leading provider of resources and information for community associations, condominium cooperatives, and their homeowners, volunteer board members, professional managers, and business professionals. I am testifying today to provide the community association industries support with amendments of HB 91, a bill establishing procedures for the removal of unenforceable restrictive covenants from property deeds. CAI applauds Representative Duncan and the co-sponsors of HB 91 for establishing this procedure, which would allow for a homeowner to have a simplified process of removing these restrictive covenants from their property deeds. To expand on this positive impact of HB 91 even further, CAI requests that this bill be amended for community association boards to also have a simplified process to remove antiquated and unenforceable discriminatory restrictions contained within covenants without a vote of their owners for the 49,000 Wyoming residents living in approximately 645 community associations within the state of Wyoming. Typically, associations have difficulty amending their governing documents because the requisite amendment process requires a vote of the majority, or even in certain circumstances, the supermajority of homeowners for an amendment to be adopted. The process by which a board must follow to amend these governing documents is an added and unnecessary expense to homeowners throughout the country. Currently, 10 states have passed a simplified process for association boards to remove discriminatory covenants, and in 2021, 9 states have introduced similar legislation considering enacting these types of processes. CAI encourages the committee and the bill sponsor to amend HB 91 to include the ability for associations in the state of Wyoming to do the exact same thing. To assist the committee, CAI submitted yesterday a recommended amendment to HB 91 that's consistent with our national model language and language that's been passed in other states. CAI advocates for all communities to take immediate steps to remove these discriminatory covenants and to continue to promote racial equity within their communities. By amending HB 49 to create this simplified process for association boards to amend their covenants, Wyoming will be joining a number of other states in allowing more associations the ability to right these past wrongs. Thank you all for your time and consideration of our suggested amendments today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or speak with you in the coming days about our suggested amendments.
All right, thank you, Ms. Nethus. Is there any questions from the committee? Committee, I think it was in your email yesterday from Phoebe. Mine came in at 10:53 a.m. With that suggested amendment language. I would say it's a little long, but certainly you can review that. Any questions at this time? Not seeing any right now, but hang tight, and at the appropriate time, that amendment may be moved and we may consult. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to pull in Mr. Steenbergen from our Chamber of Commerce here in Laramie County, and after him, we'll hear from Ms. Pruis. So as I'm pulling them both in, we're going to let Mr. Steenbergen go first. His daughter was... Oh, there's Dale. And first off, congrats on your daughter being named one of Wyoming's 2 delegates to the U.S. Senate Youth Fellowship. Pretty extraordinary honor there.
Well, I think probably any of you that know me know that she has an extraordinary mother, and that definitely helps her a lot in life, and I try not to be a burden to her. But thank you for that, Mr. Chairman and committee. And it is a privilege for me to be able to speak on this today. You know, I was thinking about how you approach something like this, and I was visiting with a friend of mine who's African-American, who is a chamber CEO in South Carolina not very long ago. And he said, you know, none of this matters until it comes down to you. And I thought about that for a while, and I just did a little research on what's happened around the country with some of these things. And in the history, you know, we've used it against Jewish folks, we've used it against Catholics, we've used these covenants against Protestants, all kinds of interesting things we've used to make sure that people that didn't fit our little goal were in our neighborhoods. And I can tell you the opposite of that is that we have businesses and even the military now working very hard to make sure that our state, and pushing us as business organizations to make sure that our state is welcoming to all those folks. And we read through some of that language, it doesn't mean much to us, but I go back to what Carlos told me. When it mentions you on that page, and you're having to explain to your kids why it says something like that in a document of the home that you're getting ready to move into, it sure does take the shine off the process. So, Mr. Chairman, from the Chamber here in Cheyenne and from the Wyoming Business and Industry Federation, representing chambers all over the state, more than 7,000 business members across the state of Wyoming, we would hope that the committee gets this bill passed, gets it to the body, and then we tell all of our folks of color around this state and really around the nation that might be interested in Wyoming, that we want to look out for them and that we will provide them a good home.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Steenbergen? Not seeing any, Dale. Thank you for testifying today. With that, we'll move to Ms. Pruis. Welcome to the House Corporations Committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Pruis, and I'm a private citizen here in Cheyenne, and I've been working diligently for almost a year to find support for this statute on my own time. My story is, in 2016, my wife and I, along with our 5 kids, moved from Laramie to Cheyenne so that my wife could pursue a full-time job at the Air National Guard. We landed in the historic avenues where we still live. That summer was a really stressful time, obviously selling our home, uprooting kids, buying a new home. And as you know, when you're sitting down to sign for purchase, it's pretty tenuous at that minute, knowing something might fall through. I'm not sure why it actually caught my eye in the middle of the signing, but a page came up that we were asked to initial. In the middle of the page, there was a restriction stating no one that is not of the Caucasian race may own this home. I was mortified and disturbed. We did ask about this clause, and we were quickly reassured that this was simply part of the original document, We had to sign it to say we saw it, but not to worry. Because of the Fair Housing Act, this type of clause was unenforceable. Obviously, we needed a house, so we signed it. My mind went to the Latinx military family that was selling us this home, wondering if they had to see that. Did they know what they signed? And yet, regardless of my concerns and disgust, we had to sign anyway. After all, there were 5 kids sitting in the car. This nagged at me for years, but last year I started digging around and I found that my racially restrictive covenant was right in the middle of my actual deed. So it's not in a covenant, it's in the deed itself. I quickly learned that while these types of restrictive covenants are common, getting to the bottom of this was a seemingly endless rabbit hole. There was no one in charge of this. No one knew about them. Didn't seem like anyone could help me get them removed. I spent a month of research and I finally came in contact with a lawyer, Crystal Stewart. One of the first things she did was research and lay out a legal path forward if I wanted to remove it from my own deed. So I can indeed do that. I'd have to go through the court system. It would cost me between $10,000 to $20,000. If I wanted that removed from my covenant, we'd have to file a court action. We'd have to serve every single homeowner in my subdivision and then have a hearing on the matter to see if I could actually get it removed. Obviously, this method is very cost prohibitive, but I really couldn't fathom making that type of investment when it would only affect my one property. My goal was not to ease my guilty conscience or to distance myself from this problem. I wanted a broad, effective solution so this offensive and archaic language can be removed from every property in Wyoming, not just my own. This is obviously not unique to Wyoming, but other states have started to remove them. I've seen lots of different variations. I've been researching all the homes in Cheyenne. Some are even more disturbing, like has been mentioned. One I see, no Negro is allowed to ever own, rent, or occupy unless they're domestic servants. While these are no longer enforceable and hopefully rarely practiced, they undoubtedly continue to shape the neighborhoods in every city, including Cheyenne and across Wyoming. I'm before you guys today because I want to make sure Wyoming lives up to its name of equality state. And this is a really easy thing for us to do. It takes little effort and no cost to right this wrong. We can effect some large change with a really simple statute. This is an offensive clause that we doggedly cling to simply because it's a hassle to remove, it's unenforceable anyway, or it's, quote, part of history. But I don't care how unenforceable this clause is. What I care about is that no one should ever have to see this. I care that it continues to restrict neighborhood diversity and unity, even in Wyoming. And I care that it hasn't already been dealt with. You know, being a military family, I know how much diversity the military brings to Cheyenne. It's a shame we haven't dealt with something as easy as removing a clause in an old document, but we have a chance right now to do one small thing that can make a huge difference. For those who worry about erasing history, this is not about that. It's just simply not shoving it in people's faces or continuing a legacy that we should all be ashamed of. The fact is, we don't want it in there anymore. I have yet to show any neighbors or friends these covenants, which they inadvertently signed, to anyone who hasn't reacted with shock and dismay. And the first question they asked me is, what can I do to help? It's kind of like, you know, we've removed signs in stores that say whites only. And this is the same thing. We would all certainly gasp in horror at the idea that a store owner could still hang this type of sign for all to see, but to get away with it by simply saying, don't worry, I can't enforce that. So today I challenge everyone here to do the right thing. The question isn't, should we take them out, but how do we take them out? This is one law in Wyoming. That may not change the world, but we can do this one good thing. And to quote my friend, Pastor Fred Gallup, a Black chaplain in the U.S. Air Force, He said, "It's wild to me that this is even needed. Just simply remove the language." Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bruce. Any questions? Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sarah, have you talked to an attorney about what the process is or how much the expense is if we didn't pass this bill? What kind of expense would it be for someone to go on their own to go and try and do this?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Duncan, the cost estimate would be between $10,000 to $20,000. And that would just be for my own personal covenant. So when we sell our home here, it's not going to be on my record, but it will be in hundreds, if not thousands of other people's records in the state.
Okay, further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Pruitt, for testifying today. Enjoy your day. For people, anyone in the waiting room who wishes to speak on this bill, I grabbed the 4 that I knew of, not seeing any other hands on this piece of legislation. With that, committee, we will close public comment. And what is your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Representative Blackburn, seconded, I saw it by Representative Clifford. First, we are now on the bill. Is there any discussion or amendments to House Bill 91? Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move my amendment that we discussed, page 3, line 16, after conveyance, insert which violates Wyoming Statute 4-26-103 through Wyoming Statute 40-26-109.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Ayer. Go ahead, Representative Duncan.
It just alleviates the problem of and clarifies rather than not every document has this. It just references it back to the Wyoming Fair Housing. So we don't get any extra. It's just the fair housing. So it's not every single document at the closing table.
Okay, discussion on the amendment from anyone on the committee?
Question.
Seeing none, question being called. All in favor of Representative Duncan's amendment, please raise your hand. That'll be unanimous. We are back on the bill. Further discussion or amendments from the committee?
Question on the bill.
Representative Duncan, go ahead.
I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee. I'm not completely, I'm not sure about the amendment that was proposed. It doesn't look on the surface to me as being a big deal, but I do have an issue that I would change. After familial status, it says in section A, it says, or maintains a trained guide dog or assistance animal because of the individual has and it has all this in here, anti-discrimination. That's not necessary. It just needs to be disability. But I don't really feel you need to, I don't necessarily feel like it needs to be addressed, the whole amendment. I think this is having to do with property owners. And this right here is talking about condo association and some members versus actual owners. So I haven't had a chance to talk to entities having to do with multi-family dwellings. So I would hold off until maybe the floor. And if I can get more clarification on this and more research on this, then I'd move forward. But I don't really have an inclination to move it at this point.
Okay, Representative Blackburn, discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Representative Duncan. I think we need to do the research on that. And if we need to, we can bring that amendment later after it's on the floor.
Okay, so I would encourage Representative Duncan. I know Ms. Urbikite can still hear us. Further research that, maybe provide the realtors a copy of that language. And if a floor amendment needs to be made, certainly let me know. And I read over it. I understand the intent. It may just need a little bit of wordsmithing to fit into Wyoming statutes a little bit better. With that, committee, further discussion on the bill?
Question?
None, and question being called. Ms. Austin, if you'd call the roll.
Yes. Representative Blackburn,
Aye.
Representative Clausen,
Aye.
Representative Clifford,
Aye.
Representative Duncan.
Aye.
Representative Air,
Aye.
Representative Hunt.
Aye.
Oh. Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Roscoe,
Aye.
and Chairman Zwanitzer.
Aye.
It's due pass with amendments.
All right, Representative Duncan, congrats on a 9-0 vote. I'm assuming you're floor managing this piece of legislation. Any help, let us know. Committee, anybody need a 5-minute break, or are we okay jumping right into the next one? Let's take about 1 minute to shuffle speakers. Ms. Pruitt, Representative Mr. Steenbergen, Ms. Nessa, thank you all for being here. Certainly appreciate your testimony. And with that, committee, let me start arranging the next bill for our consideration, which will be Representative Gray's House Bill 75. And we'll bring him in as we get ready here. Good afternoon, Representative Gray. Welcome to the Corporations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we are on House Bill 75. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Corporations Committee. I present House Bill 75, Voter Fraud Prevention, which is a voter ID bill. This bill ensures that there's an environment where it is difficult to commit fraud. It's a best practices issue. This bill also helps to provide confidence in our elections. Now I'd like to go through the bill. 2 line 18, you can see the bill amends that for the purposes of voter registration, one identification is adequate for proof of identity in accordance with rule. That's current statute, except it adds it in so that we can bifurcate registration versus identification. So then you move to page 3, lines 1 through 3, and this is when we get to the heart of the bill. This is the voter ID part, where it says that when voting in person, that is important. This bill is for in person, early or on the day of the election. The following types of ID will be allowed. And there are some amendments coming on some suggestions on what should be allowed, but just really quickly want to go through what is the current statute. First is a Wyoming driver's license pursuant to statute. Please note that does include the digital driver's license that was passed. I believe that was last year. Second is the tribal ID card pursuant to the statute. That was the tribal ID that was passed last year. I believe there's an amendment coming on that issue. Third is the Wyoming ID card. So if someone doesn't have a driver's license, they can get that Wyoming ID card, which is currently in statute, that will be able to be used for purposes of identification. Fourth is a U.S. passport. Fifth is a U.S. military card. And then sixth is a Medicare card. This came out of conversations with AARP. That subsection on the Medicare card does sunset in 2030. Page 4, lines 3 through 9. This is where it lays out that a person votes, where the identification requirement is only if person votes only if a person presents acceptable identification when voting in person, either early or on the day of the election. So this is in person. If they do not show ID, they can vote a provisional, and pursuant to 2215-105, they have that provisional time period to handle that issue if they do not have an ID. And then lines 17 through 23, this lays out that the voter ID requirement does not apply to absentee ballots. Page 5, lines 7 through 9, that amended language lays out that an individual may be challenged for failing to show an acceptable ID. And then page 5, lines 19 through 23, this is language directs YDOT in their renewal applications for driver's licenses to note that they will need to show, someone will need to show acceptable ID in order to vote. And if they do not wish to renew, that they have the ability to attain the Wyoming ID card. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the bill.
All right, committee, any questions for Representative Gray? Representative Clausen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray. So currently, when I go to my polling place, my neighbors are the poll judges, and these are people I've known my entire life. Yeah, one of them was pretty good friends with my mother. I went to school with one of them. Under this piece of legislation, would I have to show my my ID to these people I've grown up with my entire life that I see on a daily basis to verify I am who I am?
Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, law applies equally to everybody. It's a 14th Amendment requirement. So, yeah, it would. And when I talk to people, I think they're more than fine with that to bring confidence in our elections. And this is really a best practices issue. So, yes.
Okay, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, in regard to the driver's license, do you know if the statute is clear regarding whether or not one would be allowed to vote if they had inadvertently their license had expired in the last week or two or month or whatever, a short time, and they didn't know that, they didn't realize that? I think we need to make sure that it's clear that either that driver's license is still accepted or that it only is a current driver's license, so that the clerks don't have any question about whether they can allow that or not.
Representative Gray, if you want to answer, we can hold to the Secretary of State, your choice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will hold to the Secretary of State on that issue. I have an opinion on it, and I've thought a little about it. I will hold, though. Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Representative Clausen, you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a question for the bringer of this bill. So what problem are we trying to solve? Is there rampant fraud? Is there people misrepresenting it? It seems like our current system, over about the last 20 years, there's very few cases of fraud. And in the last 3 elections, there's basically zero brought forward. What problem are we trying to solve here?
Representative Gray, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, I think this is a best practices issue and creating an environment where it's difficult to commit fraud. We've talked a lot in the years on this, where really it would be impossible to know if someone showed up and said someone they knew that wasn't going to come to the polls that they knew was in the poll book. It would really be impossible to know whether they double voted unless that person ended up coming. So, I mean, I think the idea that it's 100%, I just disagree with that. And so I think this is a best practices issue, and it's about Wyoming being the gold standard on this issue and continuing to be a gold standard so that we can protect future generations. Thank you.
You have another question, Representative Clausen. Go ahead.
Just a follow-up. So in my district, it's basically all one party, the minority party. There's less than 300 voters in the minority party, and I just don't feel that there's rampant fraud or a bad practice. They check your name off when you vote.
Representative Clausen, is there a question? Representative Gray.
Yes, thank you.
No, okay. Any other further questions for the bill presenter? Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, when you were coming up with what documents would work, I was just concerned. I didn't see any like college ID, where college students might possibly not have a driver's license, and college IDs, at least in Wyoming, but they could be a Wyoming citizen going to school in Montana, and their picture IDs, and they also there's proof of citizenship with their Social Security when they got this ID. So was that considered as a possible valid ID?
Representative Gray, any consideration?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been quite a bit of discussion with the clerks and the Secretary of State on the definition on page 3. I think we're going to have 3 amendments on that. I think it's good for the committee to kind of debate those, and there's some edges on this definition. I mean, I think there's areas where 95% of us agree, and then there's some disagreement there. And I think that'll be a good discussion for the committee. The discussion on the student ID is coming, and it has been a discussion point in the very constructive dialogue with the clerks and the Secretary of State. So that amendment is going to be brought, and there's going to be that discussion on that point.
Okay. Representative Ayer, or you have a follow-up, Representative Roscoe?
Well, just a little bit. Yeah, I was just wondering, this might be covered in these amendments, Representative Gray, I think that are coming up, but it's an out-of-state driver's license that Wyoming considers a valid driver's license. You know, they have a certain amount of time before they change it. So is that coming up in an amendment as well?
I believe, Representative Roscoe, there are 3 amendments on that section, and the Secretary of State's office could probably better answer that question. I'll delay it for them. I think Representative Gray answered to the best he could. Representative Ayer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, do you see any possibility that this bill, the outcome could be that there would be less voter participation? It would discourage voter participation? Representative
Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think it's going to be the opposite. I think it's going to encourage voter participation. We saw a great deal of discouragement after the last election due to the problems that have been discussed, and I think that it's created a lack of confidence. And so I think it's going to increase participation. We've already seen what happens when confidence declines. So I think it will increase, not decrease.
Okay, further questions for the sponsor? Not Representative Clifford, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Gray, can you tell me how that's going to increase participation? How is this bill going to increase it?
Representative Gray, go ahead if you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's been a lot of discussion on this, and particularly in Georgia, how after the lack of confidence in the November led to a decline in participation in the runoff. That's just one example. So increased confidence means that people are more inclined to participate.
Okay.
Follow up, Chairman.
Follow up, Representative Clifford.
Do you have a Wyoming example?
Representative Gray, any examples in Wyoming of, I think the question is encouraged voter participation? If you have one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that is applicable to Wyoming. I mean, it's definitely, the overall rule is that increased confidence is going to lead to increased participation.
Okay, further questions for the bill presenter? Not seeing any at this time. We're going to bring the Secretary of State's office in as the executive branch agency. But don't go too far there, Representative Gray. With that, Secretary of State's office, welcome, Secretary Buchanan.
Thank you, Chairman Zwanitzer and members of the committee. Looks like you can hear me okay, and I see myself and Kai is here with me on the video. I would just start off by saying, after having participated or being asked to participate in collaboration on this piece of legislation, and going through it, I found my way to be able to support this piece of legislation. I think it's a proactive piece of legislation, and although it's been pointed out that we don't see a lot of fraud in the state of Wyoming, we're very lucky to live where we live. There's no doubt about that. But I would point out just a couple of things. Our small population and having those personal relationships, I think, has prevented a fair amount of fraud. And I just think that now that 2020 is here, even 4 years ago, 8 years ago, really every election cycle in the past, I never would have thought we would be facing the issues primarily in the electorate confidence in our elections. And I campaigned in 2014 and then again in 18. And I said that, if folks ever lose faith in our elections, then all is lost, because they will lose faith in their government. They will lose faith in law enforcement. They will lose faith in the legislature, in my office, because anyone that's in a position of authority I suppose might be questioned. And so it's a proactive piece of legislation is the way I see it, going forward. And so I'm supporting the bill because of the collaboration that's involved. Now, part of that collaboration has produced, by my count, 3 amendments at this point in time. And I support the amendments. I think they're good amendments, and they occurred because of a robust discussion with the county clerk's office, with legislators, and even there was a great question brought up today. I believe it was Representative Ayer that talked about an expired driver's license, and so I'll come to that in just a moment. But today we do have 3 amendments to bring before the committee. I'm not going to bring them before the committee. Mary Langford of the County Clerks Association is going to bring those amendments, but they do deal with basically being more inclusive in the numbers of different types of IDs that will be included, including out-of-state driver's licenses, college IDs, and tribal IDs, because we want this to be a piece of legislation that works. And I've made my pledge to everybody, and everybody listening knows that I want integrity in our elections, but I will also fight to the death and go anywhere in this state if I were to ever find that someone is disenfranchised, or someone who is an eligible voter is not being allowed to vote. And I mean that. I would go anywhere in the state and get to the bottom of that issue. So my message to the committee today is I believe we can have the best of all worlds here. And as long as I'm Secretary of State, I will see to it that every eligible voter is able to vote. And I will also see that our elections have the utmost in integrity. And that's why I support the legislation, in addition to the amount of collaboration that went into this. Back to the issue of the driver's licenses that have been expired. I believe that is something that could be addressed in statute or in rule. I don't know about many of you, but when I've gone to get my driver's license renewed, they mark it void for purposes of it being a driver's license, but they tell you that it is still good for purposes of identification. I guess if you needed it. So that would be my best answer to that question. And I think we could incorporate that into into rule or into statute. As part of this legislation, we've done an extensive review on our rules with regard to identification, and we will square up those rules to match up with this legislation in its final form. And with that, I would stand for any question.
Questions for the Secretary of State? I'm not seeing any at this time, Mr. Secretary, but I'm sure you'll stick around and we might have some questions. Mr. Schoen, State Elections Director, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have anything else to add to what Secretary Buchanan has already mentioned, but I would stand for questions as well.
We'll be here.
All right, thank you. And so committee and members of the audience, just so you know the roadmap, I'm going to bring in the county clerks next, and then we'll start going through basically issue groups. So then probably the League of Women Voters, AARP, I see the Farm Bureau, Ms. Simons, and so we'll just start going by groups and individual constituents. So next up, let's bring in the county clerks. I saw Ms. Langford and I see Ms. Freeze. So we're going to bring them in, have them at least talk about the amendments, and then at the appropriate time, we can, if the bill gets moved, move them into the bill. Welcome, Ms. Langford. Been a while. Good to see you.
Good afternoon, committee, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here and to testify in front of the committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the Wyoming County Clerks Association. With me at the table today is the Honorable Julie Freeze, Fremont County Clerk, as well as the Honorable Gwen Bartlett, Carbon County Clerk. Our purpose today is to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections and the effect of the incorporation of a voter identification into the process for voting. The clerks appreciate the opportunity to review drafts and provide input into the development of this legislation. First, I'd like to review the voter registration process that relates to the flow chart and registration form that you received from me. Things to note, the voter registration form is a sworn statement and is part of Wyoming statute. Once its information is entered into the voter registration system called WILREG, it is scanned for felons, citizenship, death, and by WYDOT. Any failure of this review can void the application. The various documents and combinations thereof are delineated in rules promulgated by the Secretary of State's office and are currently used in Wyoming for voter registration purposes and are defined as acceptable identification in Chapter 2, identification of election purposes for election purposes of the Wyoming Administrative Rules for Elections Procedures by the Secretary of State. These rules are necessitated by Section 303 of the Help America Vote Act of 2002. So affectionately known as HAVA. With Chapter 3 of the Wyoming Statute 22, county clerks use these items to register voters. With this legislation, a voter will be required to present an acceptable form of ID as delineated by this bill, which will then be compared by an election official to the person and to the voter registration list. It's the association's position that all photo IDs that are acceptable for voter registration should be and are acceptable for voter identification. This will eliminate confusion for the voters and the election officials alike. And with that, you have heard I have 3 proposed amendments so that we can accomplish that goal of including all of those IDs. And I believe you have those in front of you, and I'll walk through those with you. The first one is an amendment to the current tribal identification statute. The statute now, I'm sorry, let me back up. Where it discusses this on page 3 of line, and on line 8, it says tribal identification card that meets the requirements of Wyoming Statute 22-3103. We propose that that be amended and that we delete the statute site and expand that so that it's the issued by the governing body of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe of Wyoming, the Northern Arapaho Tribe of Wyoming, and other federally recognized Indian tribes. What that does is it will expand the IDs to include those that were issued before the 2020 legislation, as well as with the IDs that were authorized with the 2020 legislation. So, and I believe you were familiar with the tribal ID legislation that occurred last session. The second amendment that we would like to offer includes driver's licenses or identification cards issued by any state or outlying possession of the United States. This addition will conform to the current rules that we're using to register voters. Wyoming driver's licenses and identification cards from all states are used approximately 96% of the time for voter registration currently in Wyoming. Of that 96%, 80% are from Wyoming and 20% are from other states. And in response to the question that we had about expired driver's licenses, currently what happens with that is WYDOT, when you go and renew your driver's license, they will give you back your expired card with void punched in it, but they also give you a printed copy of your temporary license, which includes a photo ID. So they give you the card as well as the printed photo ID on your temporary license, and it has the full force and effect of a regular current driver's license. So that might be helpful information to know. The third amendment that we would like to offer is to include the photo identification cards that are issued by the University of Wyoming, of a Wyoming community college, or of a Wyoming public school. Use of school identification cards issued by Wyoming institutions has assisted and encouraged the younger group of voters to participate in the election process. Election participation initiatives were started in 2016 on several Wyoming campuses and continue to be successful. Those photo documents are currently used for Wyoming registration purposes and are defined as acceptable identification in Chapter 2 of the rules. And a little more backup information on a college ID. We have discussed with the University of Wyoming that for them to provide to the requirement for a UW ID is that you must provide a government ID in most cases, which will end up being a driver's license, or for a foreign student, a passport. With that university or community college ID and the last 4 digits of a social security number, you would be allowed to register to vote in Wyoming under our current rules. We've also found out that when those documents are presented for voter registration, or not for voter registration, but for a university ID, that they verify the name, the birth date, the photo on the ID is provided so that before the ID is issued by the University of Wyoming. So they are vetted on the backside of that ID. And then once that is used with the 4 digits of social security number, is also vetted through the WildReg process when we do voter registration. So in closing, again, I'd just like to reiterate that we would appreciate your consideration of these 3 amendments. They bring our current registration, they are currently used for voter registration. Would make sense that they would be available for use for ID going forward. And the scenario that I think of is that a person comes in with an out-of-state driver's license, registers to vote in May, and in August he goes to vote at the primary election. And if his out-of-state driver's license isn't recognized as an ID, then he's not allowed to vote. He's registered to vote, but he's not going to be allowed to vote because he doesn't have a suitable ID or an acceptable ID. So consistency with registration with voter IDs only makes sense on our part for the convenience of the voters and to help the election administrators as they administer the election going forward if this legislation is passed. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I also have some backup with Clerk Freeze and First Clerk Bartlett, and we are all 3 anxious to stand for question. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Langford. I just had one initial question just to make sure I'm not confused. If we have a foreign national on a passport who's, let's say, on a 3 or 4 year education visa, are they eligible to register to vote or to vote? I was confused when you were talking about passports.
They have to have a social security number. They have to, you would use their social security, or you would use their, the last 4 digits of their social security card, which I would doubt that they would have. And again, the clerk has some flexibility to investigate those situations to make sure that they've got the proper ID and credentials to be able to register to vote. And also, once that's entered into WildReg and is scanned through the process, it might trip it out for that. But
okay. Further questions from the committee for the county clerks? Let me just make sure Ms. Freeze or Ms. Bartlett, if they don't put on their videos, I'll assume they don't have anything to add at this time. There's Ms. Bartlett. Hi, Gwen. All right, seeing no questions yet, let's move on to the League of Women Voters. We'll be bringing in Marguerite Herman into the room. And Miss Bartlett, Miss Langford, if I could just have you turn off your cameras, don't leave the room, but that way the YouTube screen keeps 8 of us in the picture. With that, Miss Herman, welcome to the Corporations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to get my camera going here. If you just bear with me a second. Doggone it. Hang on. You don't really have to watch me, but I'll do it. Okay. Okay, there we are. Sorry for the delay there. I will be brief. Mr. Chairman, I'm Marguerite Herman, appearing here for the League of Women Voters of Wyoming. And so Chairman and Committee, thank you. My remarks will be brief. I know you may have a long line of people wanting to testify. This is in opposition to House Bill 75. The League of Women Voters supports secure voter registration and election systems, and within that, the widest possible participation of qualified electors in the selection of officials to run their government. The League also supports efficient government operations consistent with that familiar admonition, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. You'll excuse the grammar there. House Bill 75 proposes a new requirement of Wyoming voters that seems to achieve no improved security, but potentially hinders voters who predate the current registration ID requirement or who don't have an acceptable ID at the time they are at the polls. We know our registration practices are robust, and the county clerks and the Secretary of State have listed those out. And the process there does require an ID, and it does determine eligibility, I think, very effectively and very thoroughly. In addition, local and state election officials say there is no evidence of pervasive voter impersonation that would be remedied by showing an ID at the polls. Aside from potential suppression, this proposal would, I think, support the false narrative that our elections currently are insecure and the results are unreliable, because I don't think that's true, and I haven't seen any evidence of it. On the other hand, the League of Women Voters has a couple of suggestions to support secure, accessible elections, if at some point you wanted to take them up: online registration and post-election risk limiting audits to provide confidence that the votes were counted correctly. And I do appreciate the efforts of the amendments to iron out problems, making it easier to get IDs, to use alternate IDs and that sort of thing. I do appreciate that, but I'm arguing that the premise for the bill at all is shaky at best. So please, let's turn our efforts to assuring Wyoming elections and polls are open, transparent, secure, and accessible to every qualified elector. And those are my comments. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
All right. Questions from Ms. Herman from the League of Women Voters? Not seeing any, Marguerite, but thank you for testifying today.
Thank you very much, committee.
Enjoy your Wednesday. Mr. Moline from the Farm Bureau, welcome to Corporations.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. As I'm sure most of you know, the position that I take on bills is dependent upon what my members' policy is, what we have voted on and put into our policy book. So showing our support for this bill, this fits in with our policy. It's been stated that we don't have a problem. I don't think we know how much of a problem we have. I don't think it's very big, but I think this bill will help increase the confidence and lower the chances of voter fraud. I don't think we have very much, but I think this will help lower incidences that we do have. And I'm trying to be brief, Mr. Chairman. I know that's uncharacteristic of me, but with that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Any questions for the Farm Bureau? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Next up, Mr. Laycock with AARP. Welcome to Corporations, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, my name is Tom Laycock. I'm the Associate State Director for AARP Wyoming. We're a nonpartisan organization that represents 83,000 members in the state aged 50 and over. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on the bill. So I want to offer our support, especially at a provision that allows for Medicare cards to be used as voter ID. Over the past 2 years, AARP Wyoming has asked those sponsoring voter ID bills to help us protect the voting rights of older Wyomingites who are aging and may not carry a state-issued ID. A 2006 study by the Brennan Center at New York University tells us 1 in 5 U.S. citizens over the age of 65 lacks a current government-issued ID. If these numbers held true in Wyoming, that'd be about 10,000 voters in the cowboy state without a current government form of ID. To put a face on that group, consider someone who might be in a nursing home or is homebound or does not have a life that requires they show an ID very often or at all. These folks still find a way to vote. If you're not aware, the age range with the highest percentage of eligible voters casting ballots in Wyoming is between the ages of 70 and 79. The numbers begin to drop some after the age of 80. As the becomes a little bit more difficult for folks to get to the polls. This is an age group that I would encourage anyone considering future election law to keep in mind. Older Wyomingites enjoy voting, they see it as their right, and have asked us to protect those voting rights. So this year we worked with the bill's sponsors to find what we think can be a workable solution to protecting the voting rights of older Wyomingites. That is House Bill 75's allowance for a Medicare card to be used as voter ID when there's no other available options. When you're enrolled in Medicare, you'll get your Medicare card in the mail. If you're automatically enrolled, as most people are, you get a Medicare card in the mail 3 months before your 65th birthday. Or if you're on disability, you get a card during your 25th month of getting disability benefits. Medicare cards are used as voter ID already in Colorado and West Virginia. During the bill drafting process, we worked with the West Virginia Secretary of State's office to get a sense for any issues that they've experienced in accepting Medicare cards as ID. We were told the experience in West Virginia is that the overwhelming majority of voters will use the driver's license as voter ID, but when a license isn't present, the Medicare card has been a nice backstop in West Virginia for people who are a little bit older. We also want to compliment Misty Dobson and YDOT for its support and willingness to get the word out that state-issued IDs would be required by 2029. And helping our citizens get state ID cards to those citizens when possible and when eligible through the mail. So this is important because it's commonplace for a lot of our members and Wyomingites who decide to stop driving to simply put the driver's license in a drawer. There isn't a great understanding that YDOT will help you get a state ID card if you're able to make it to a YDOT station and tell staff specifically you're relinquishing your driver's license and would like a state ID card. So in conclusion, I want to thank the sponsors of the bill for helping us to find ways to keep our members voting. If you use social media as your guide to politics in this era, you wouldn't think that's possible for folks who have been on opposite sides of similar bills in the past to work together to find a solution in the present, but I want to offer kudos to the bill sponsor. We worked together and found what we believe to be a very good compromise. So that said, I will thank the committee for consideration of the bill and stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for AARP? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Mr. Laycock. And that also reminded me, I forgot to bring in YDOT earlier, so I brought them in. Representative Duncan, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is for AARP. I had this concern from a constituent and I didn't have the answer for it. They asked me and they said that the Medicare card has no photo on it. Is that true or not true? So they wouldn't be able to use it as their form of ID for voting. Can you clarify that for me?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Laycock.
Representative Duncan, that's a very good question. The Medicare card does not have a photo. However, the provision in this bill would allow for that Medicare card to be used as ID for voting.
So follow up?
Follow up, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I get it. I don't know if I need to address this to the bringer of the bill later on, but so this whole thing is a voter ID, and the whole purpose of all the other pieces of identification are photo in order to verify you are who you are. So if you are using a Medicare card and you have no photo on it, that kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Technically, Mr. Laycock, we're on you. Thoughts on that question?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, it is a government issued ID, form of ID. It's something I know in a perfect world, everything would have a photo. Unfortunately, we do have that population group that doesn't have that ability. So the thinking being, this will let us on-ramp into 2029 so people can kind of get used to the idea of making sure they have that photo ID, that state issue ID card. You know, if they do have trouble getting to a YDOT station or aren't able to get it through the mail.
Okay. Follow up, Representative Duncan.
One final follow-up. So Mr. Tom, sorry. Help me, if I were a person who was on Medicare and I went to the physician and the doctor's office and I present my Medicare card, do they just assume I am who I am, or as a procedure, do they require a photo ID when they go to the doctor with their Medicare card, or how does that process work?
Mr. Laycock, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Duncan, I'm not sure that I can answer that question. I know that I did used to work for the Medical Society. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I got quite into that level of minutia, but it is considered to be an identification card, a government issued identification card.
We'll have a lot of doctors on the next bill, I'm sure. With that, further questions, Mr. Laycock? Not seeing any at this time. Thank you very much, Tom. Real quick, Mr. Rossetti from YDOT, you were at the very bottom of my list and I just didn't see your name. Does YDOT as a state agency have any comments on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, no, we were just here observing in case you needed to pull us in.
Which I did. So while you're here, committee, any questions? Not seeing any. Well, thanks for letting me pull you in real quick. Don't go too far. With that, Ms. Craven, welcome to corporations.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Floor is yours.
My name is Cassie Craven, members of the committee. I am the contract lobbyist for the Wyoming Liberty Group. And this year we have been taking a look at voting laws generally. So I'll be testifying today on and in support of this particular bill. Mostly I want to keep my comments very brief and very broad. I first of all want to speak with great support toward what this is seeking to accomplish. I think that preserving the integrity of our elections and making sure that we are the gold standard in our nation as Wyomingites is of critical importance. I don't support a method of lawmaking that sits back and waits until something is broken before we take initiative to make it right. And to ensure the integrity of an election is solely the constitutional duty of the legislature. And so I think that it's an important topic, and I want to tip my hat to everyone who came to the table, stakeholder-wise, who is a part of this bill. And I think it really shows and demonstrates in these times what Wyoming can really do on all sides of the aisle from different perspectives when we work together. And so I'm very proud of this work, and I want to speak in support of just a couple ideas that as the Wyoming Liberty Group, the people that we benefit and the individuals that we talk to across our state have raised to us. And I think that they're both important. First of all, within the context of voting, this is a right. This is a right that the government can take away. It is a right that the government can monitor. And so with that right, I find it unfortunate that so oftentimes we frame this conversation in light of, what we're doing against people. I think that we need to take this on wholeheartedly and really work from the perspective that registering to vote is not supposed to be an easy task. It's supposed to be a secure task, and we are supposed to make sure that the appropriate measures are in place. When we talk about increased participation, of course, as representatives, that's something that I think is within the confines that you should be concerned about. But at the end of the day, we are here to ensure that the law is upstanding, that it can be followed and preserve the integrity of our elections so that people believe in it. Because what are we if we are not just a group of people who are believing in what the idea of what America is? And so I want to keep my comments very broad. There are people that can speak far more eloquently than I as to some of the finer points that I'm sure, but I want to encourage you to really be the innovators and see the future for your constituents. I think that that's why they elected you all, is that they trust that in you. And I'm proud that Wyoming has not had the fraud stories we've seen across the country in the news. But I hope that going forward, we can be the gold standard for our nation. And I think that that's what our citizens deserve. So on and in support of the bill, and I'll happily stand for any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Craven. Any questions from the committee? Not seeing you right now, Cassie, but thank you for your time today and coming to corporations. Good to see you as always.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you.
Next up will be Mr. Merrill from the Equality State Policy Center. Welcome, Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Merrill, Executive Director of the Equality State Policy Center. I'm here today to speak in opposition to this bill. Everybody tells me this bill is going to pass, Mr. Chairman, in part because it appears to be co-sponsored by nearly the entire membership of the legislature. But before you send this bill on its merry way, I'm here to ask this committee to take a step back and consider a few important things first. First, this entire bill is based on a false premise. It's a bill that seeks to fix a problem that doesn't exist in Wyoming. It would supposedly prevent somebody from going to the polls and impersonating a registered voter, and then illegally voting while pretending to be that registered voter, even though there's zero evidence of this ever happening in Wyoming. And so I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge out loud that this bill, by its very title, implicitly impugns the intentions and actions of at least some Wyoming voters, even though there's zero evidence available to levy any such allegations. The real thing that threatens to undermine voters' faith in the integrity of our elections, Mr. Chairman, are unsubstantiated claims and outright lies about the existence of voter fraud. That's the truly dangerous thing that's going on these days when it comes to our elections. In conversations about election security, we should always try to achieve the overarching goal of balancing accessibility and security. And the concept of best practices was used to introduce this bill today. The most basic best practice when it comes to voting laws, Mr. Chairman, is to first do no harm. An essential best practice is to ensure that whatever decisions you make in legislation, you don't unnecessarily make it harder for people to vote. And rather than spending our energies and resources focusing on unproductive bills like these, we should be working instead to increase voter turnout and make it as easy as possible for people to vote. We should make our policies as pro-voter as possible. We do not have a voter fraud problem in Wyoming. We have a voter participation problem. We should be doing everything we can to encourage and enable more eligible voters to vote. A better way to balance accessibility with security, Mr. Chairman, when it comes to elections in Wyoming would be to implement automatic voter registration. So every time an eligible voter in Wyoming interacted with the Department of Transportation or the county clerk's office or the county treasurer's office, et cetera, they would automatically be registered to vote unless they explicitly opted out. And if they're already registered, then these interactions with agencies would be a continuous way to ensure that our voter database is clean, up to date, that a voter's address is correct, et cetera. That would be a better law to consider, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman. But if the committee still chooses to go forward with this bill, I'd ask you to consider a few questions and then also consider a couple of proposed improvements before you do. One question is, have we given enough consideration to the fact that some people do not have a state-issued photo ID or a Medicare card? What about people who just moved into Wyoming from another state? What about people, including newlyweds, who are in the middle of a name change process and their photo ID currently doesn't match up with their legal name? One amendment you might consider, Mr. Chairman, is to allow for more ways for a voter to prove their identity. This bill would be improved by including student IDs, for example, a driver's license issued by another state, a utility bill that has a voter's name and address on it, or if at least two other citizens present in the polling place can affirm that the person is who they say they are, they should be allowed to vote. Another amendment that deserves some serious consideration would be an appropriation to cover at the cost of at least two things. If we're going to require that people have a state-issued photo ID, we should have an appropriation in this bill to cover the cost of acquiring one. So we're not levying a de facto poll tax. There should also be money appropriated to advertise this law far and wide. in newspapers, on the radio, billboards, etc. So as few people as possible are blindsided when they go to the polls. There are people in Wyoming who've been voting in the state for decades, and they've never been asked to furnish an ID. States like Colorado, Montana, Utah, they've taken steps to significantly improve their voter participation. So a better approach than this bill would be to undertake a study of other states that have been successful in securely increasing their voter turnout and participation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my testimony, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions of the ESPC? Not seeing any, Chris, but thanks for hanging out with us today and waiting a bit there in the chat room. Certainly always appreciate seeing you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Simons, welcome to Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. So I agree with about half of what the previous person said, but I came to different conclusions. So the first one is that I do agree that we have a participation problem, but I don't think that it's accessibility that's the issue. I think it is apathy. So this bill doesn't really address one way or the other on that. I would like to see us do something about participation, where we have about 200,000 potential voters in the state of Wyoming who are not registered. And I don't think it's because they don't get access to the courthouse, but that they just do not feel encouraged to do so. Also, in terms of the conversations about we don't have a problem with voter fraud, the reality is that perception is reality. And in the last 6 months, it has become really clear that there is an ever increasing number of individuals and groups who feel that we do have voter fraud. So the issue isn't, do we need to address voter fraud? The issue is that we need to address the perception of voter fraud. And therefore, if this type of legislation will help bolster that feeling that we do in fact have probably the most appropriate and capable registration and voter processes in the country, I think that alone makes it well worthwhile. I do want to encourage you to take on the amendments that have been presented by the clerks. What we had previously was a disparity between documentation to register and documentation to actually vote. And I was looking at it from the fact that the reason that we are exempt from the motor voter law, or the HAVA, is in part due to our ability to have people register and vote on election day. We want to make sure that complies. So somebody takes the time to go to the polls, they show up with the documents that allow them to register, and then they get told that the same documents could not be used in order to actually cast a vote other than provisional. So I really encourage those changes to be made. We don't want to have any differences whatsoever between the ability to register and the ability to vote. And I think the changes that they ask for provide for that. I do want to point out that I could not find anywhere in here where it talks about photo. So the question that the representative from Goshen County had around having a non-photo ID that is a Medicare card, because there's nothing that I can see on here that says photo, it actually would get included. The fact is that the rest of the identifications do require photo. The bill itself does not state that that's a necessary part. It just happens that those are the ones that have it. So I think that that's really not a particular issue. I do agree with the concern that that was presented by the previous speaker on the lack of an ID being an effective poll tax. And I think that does need to be addressed. I think that even though it's a small amount, if we are going to now require an ID, it must have no cost associated for that individual. Now, the overwhelming majority are going to have a driver's license or passport or military ID. But in those events where they do not, I think it's critical that we have that. And then finally, I'm looking at 22-3-118, which is proof of identity. And in subparagraph A, Romanette II, I think that's how you say it. I find the language a little perplexing. I do not believe that you are allowed to register in Wyoming other than in person. So the language says voting by absentee ballot after having registered by mail and having submitted a copy of the person's acceptable identification at the time of registration. So unless there's been a change in the rules, I don't believe that we're allowed to register by mail. So I think this might be language that got pulled in from another state or from a formatted bill. Again, because I believe that we need to address the perception, I think that it warrants this bill. I don't know if this is possible. Because I don't think we have voter fraud prevention, I would really prefer that this be named something like voter identification integrity. This is about taking a positive action to reinforce our beliefs in and capabilities of our registration and voters. And so to have it be framed negatively in a way that I believe, whether unintentionally, makes suspect the capabilities of our clerks and elections offices and our Secretary of State, who've done a fantastic job. I'd really like us to get away from this voter fraud prevention and take the positive of voter identification integrity. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Simons? Not seeing any at this time, Gail. I know the Secretary of State probably will respond to 2 of those points on registration. We'll call them back up, and Representative Duncan was busily writing amendments down, as I could tell. So thank you for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Next up, Mr. Giraldo. Welcome to Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me, members of the committee. My name is Nicholas Giraldo, and I am a resident of Laramie, Wyoming, and I would like to voice my opposition to House Bill 75, the Voter Fraud Prevention Bill, and also ask that the committee not move it forward. My reasons for opposition are simple. This is an unnecessary intervention into a process that has been running smoothly and fraud-free for many election cycles. Granted, the bill does propose rules that are in line with the Secretary of State's current rules and IDs and have been run past the county clerks around the state, and it does not constitute disenfranchisement by any means. However, what makes this bill not up to muster is the fact that it is essentially trying to address a problem that is not there and undermining faith in the democratic process. For instance, from the year 2000 to 2020, there were 3.7 million total ballots cast in elections, that's including primary, special elections, and general elections throughout Wyoming. Of those roughly 3.7 million votes, there were only 3 election fraud cases that resulted in criminal convictions that occurred in that time period. And that was in 2000, 2001, and 2014, according to the Heritage Foundation's voter fraud database. This results in a voter fraud occurrence rate of 0.00008%, or 1 fraudulent vote in every 1.25 million votes cast. To put this into perspective, the odds of getting struck by lightning are 1 in 500,000. So I would like to, in addition, I would also like to point out that many members of this committee won their seats in fair and fraud-free elections. In fact, a large majority of you won your seats with a commanding majority of your district's votes in the last election. More than 3/4 of you ran unopposed. Your place in the Wyoming legislature is not the result of fraudulent voters, election worker misconduct, or rigged elections. It is an example of free and fair access to the ballot and confidence in the democratic process by your constituents. Passing this bill will not only legitimize the false claim that voter fraud exists, it will also undermine the integrity of our elections, which are the foundation to to the democratic values that we hold very dear as Wyomingites and as Americans. Our election system is already following best practices and operating at a gold standard, given the very, very low instances of voter fraud. Voter turnout has also been on the increase here in Wyoming, which tells me that they're confident in the system as it currently stands. I ask that the committee find solutions that address actual problems facing Wyoming voters instead of creating a law that is essentially trying to fix something that, honestly, it ain't broke. So thank you very much for your consideration. I stand to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none right now, Nick, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Next up, Ms. Butler, welcome to Corporations. You have the floor. Oh, but you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Chloe Butler. I support this bill wholeheartedly. Obviously, from the amount of discussion here, you can see that this is on a lot of people's minds. This is very important. And I would disagree that we're trying to fix something that ain't broke, so to speak. I am super thankful to be in a county where I have watched our county clerk take precautions upon precautions to ensure the integrity of our elections. I've stood as an election judge several times. I've seen the constituents here proudly come to vote in large numbers and quite joyfully. And I would say that if we are allowed to start feeling that our vote doesn't matter, why bother? That's actually the one thing I hear from people that I understand are not registered. They tell me, well, why bother? It doesn't count anyway. Anything that can increase our belief that our system has ultimate integrity and we can trust it, and it will increase participation. When people feel empowered to, that their voice will be heard, they will come to speak up. So I support this, especially since the general logic is that you don't wait to fix the gate until after the wolves are in. Everyone says this can't happen in Wyoming. This is an amazing place and I'm very proud to be here. But there are lots of states out there that had a lot of integrity years past and now it's gone. It's all under question. Nobody's sure. By the time it gets to where we have to question whether or not fraud is happening, it's too late. We've already got people in your seat that stole the seat from you, no matter what side of the aisle they're on. So let's not wait to fix something until after it's already too late. And I thank you all for being the guardians of this sacred right. I thank you for standing up for our Constitution so that we do not become voiceless and unempowered. And once again, I wholeheartedly support this bill.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Butler? Not seeing any, Chloe, but thank you for testifying today. Certainly appreciate having you. Enjoy your Wednesday. Next up, Mr. Selmer, welcome to Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, first of all, I want to applaud your actions on the previous bill. That unanimous vote, I think, sends a good message to people who care about fairness and diversity in Wyoming. I want to make two quick points. One is that this appears to me to be something that's going to add significant time and/or another position to every election site in the state. Either current officials are going to have to check IDs in addition to their other duties, or another position is going to have to be added. Either way, I think this adds a complexity that's not needed. Another important point, I think, is my face. If you look at my ID, you will see a man that looks significantly younger with hair, who has not had cancer and not had chemotherapy. And if I went to the poll, I would expect that a conscientious poll worker would say, is this really you? I think that's, a photo ID is not a guarantee that you can accurately be sure that the person you're looking at is the person that should be voting. And my final point is that Representative Gray mentioned in his statements that there is a lack of confidence in our elective process because of, and I quote, what happened in the November election. All of us should be very clear by now, based on audits, recounts, legal judgments, as well as the statements of election officials, secretaries of states, and governors around the country, both Republican and Democrat, that there was very little fraud of any kind in the 2020 election. Any lack of confidence in our elective process is completely the result of statements like Representative Gray made and our previous speaker also. This bill just encourages that. Our system of registration and voting in Wyoming is extremely safe. And I really believe that all of you should be more focused in funding our education system and finding a way to get through this incredible budget crisis that we're in. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions from Mr. Selmer? I'm not seeing it at this time, Mike. Certainly, thank you for testifying before us today.
Thank you.
Next up will be Ms. Foland. Welcome, Cheryl. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cheryl Foland, and I'm a resident of Rollins, and a very proud Wyoming Night transplant. I've been in Wyoming, and this is my home for the past 7 years. I was one of those people who was caught off guard during our election cycle, the general election, when I presented to our voting place and was told that I had an absentee ballot and that there was a problem. And Ms. Bartlett's office immediately looked into the situation. I don't know what she found on her end, but I was ultimately able to vote in person without a problem. But there were several minutes, probably about 5 to 10 minutes, of a lot of concern by several different people, and not just myself. I am very pleased, privileged, and so blessed to live in this state and to live in Wyoming and the United States. I have lived abroad for many years in countries that I kiss the ground every time I come back. This is an opportunity, and I'm in support of this bill. This is an opportunity to be proactive. And it's one of the first times I've ever had to testify where I'm not testifying to a reactive bill. Is the bill perfect? No. Are there some changes that have to be made? Yes. But when I look at the bigger picture and when I look at transplants to Wyoming, I think we have great opportunities. And I commend Representative Gray and the folks that he's been working with and the members of this committee in your decision making, that this is a fabulous opportunity. And I would encourage the committee to pass this bill. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Questions from Ms. Foland? Not seeing it right now, Cheryl. Thank you for your time. You have an amazing county clerk, and I'm sure she solved all the issues. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown, I'm just guessing you might want to testify on this bill, so I pulled you into the committee room. Hi, Margaret.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and committee. Yes, I do want to testify on this bill, and I'll be very brief. Several other people have already said the things that I would say. I would just caution you about and I would love to talk to Mr. Laycock about getting a state ID card. I went through this with my sister when she had to give up her driver's license, and it took 3 trips and 2 of them out of town to get a state ID card for her. Is this, and it cost $10 at that time. Is this normal? Was it just because she lived in Casper and the driver's license places in Casper are overrun with people? I don't know. We finally went to Douglas to do this. And she had somebody that would drive her there. What about people that don't have that ability? We're saying, okay, you're elderly, you're disabled, whatever, and you have to find somebody to take you to the driver's license place and go through this process. I think we need to think about this very carefully. We have, and I don't know what the answer is from Mr. Laycock. Maybe they've changed their requirements. I would hope so. The other thing I think that that hasn't been talked about very much is the difference of our registration process compared to some other states. And yes, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and yes, we talk to league members from other states. They're always amazed that we have to have certify the signature on our application for registration. We either have to do it in front of at the clerk's office, or we have to have it notarized. Other states don't do that. You sign it, they take your signature, and you're registered after you filled out the form, of course. So we already have some additional requirements in Wyoming that some other states don't have. All of these things, when we talk about the amount of people, the under usage of voting in Wyoming, all of these things are just little barriers, one barrier after another. And I would hope that we work to get rid of some of these barriers and encourage people to vote instead of putting up fences and gates and barriers to being able to vote. It's our privilege, yes, but it's also our duty. And as citizens, we need to be voting, and more of us need to be doing that. Anything we can do to make that happen, I'm in favor of. I served on the HAVA committee years ago when that legislation was passed about how were we going to carry out the requirements of HAVA in Wyoming. And the thing that we worked on the most was barriers to the polling places. Were there steps? Were there, was it in the basement? Was it upstairs? All those sorts of things, so that people could get into the polling places. That was our big, that was what we worked on the most across Wyoming. And I think with good results. But now we're putting up other kinds of barriers, and I really do not like to see that. With that, I will quit because other people have said the same things. And Mr. Chairman, I would take questions if anybody wants.
Any questions for former Representative Brown, who has the distinction of also being married to former Representative Brown?
That's right.
One of the few people in Wyoming history who's a legislator and spouse of a legislator. All right, seeing none, Margaret, always a pleasure seeing you.
Thank you.
For the rest of your day.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the waiting room who's here on this bill? If so, please raise your hand. I believe everyone else is here for the next one. Oh, Miss Roseberry is here. So committee, I'm bringing a wonderful gal now who used to testify to Revenue Committee and always makes my day when I see her. So welcome, Phyllis. Oh, Ms. Roseberry, can you hear us?
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll start my video, although my picture's probably better. Yes, I'll take a very short amount of time because I'm just gonna, I won't reiterate what other people have said. Yes, I'm Phyllis Roseberry. I live outside of Worland for 42 years. Give me some Wyoming street cred. Our children and grandchildren live here. I've been an election judge in Washakie County for our outstanding county clerk, Mary Grace, and totally impressed by the way she professionally runs our elections. So I stand in opposition to this bill because, like other people have said, I think it's not based in reality. We don't have fraud. What we have is a lack of participation. So if the problem is perception that the election isn't secure, to me, solution to that problem is for our elected officials and our civil servants, like our Secretary of State, keep reiterating that the elections are safe and secure and put out data that show that to alleviate that perception rather than putting up obstacles for people to vote. And for me, best practices, which is one of the rationale for this bill, and being proactive is in favor and in support of our democracy, which means increasing voter participation, not putting up barriers. So best practices would be making registration easier, making voting easier, not making it more difficult. I mean, just the lady who just spoke, I think has a good point. I mean, some people don't drive. Some people are working 2 and 3 jobs. The driver's license office in our town has very restricted hours. I mean, people are going to have difficulty. Some people don't drive, don't even own a car. So I think we're precluding their options to vote, and they're part of our democracy. We should be working to include them, not to keep them out. So I don't see there's any evidence for any restrictive action to be taken at all. And I think this won't end well if we try to disenfranchise some of our fellow citizens. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. Any questions, Ms. Roseberry? Not seeing any. Enjoy the rest of your day. Always a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So with that, committee, I do not see any further public comment in the waiting room. So we're going to close public comment. I'm going to allow Representative Gray, some reaction or thoughts to some of the testimony. And then after that, I'll ask for a motion on the bill. Representative Gray, anything you'd like to?
Thank you, Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple comments. Did want to respond to Representative Duncan's point on the Medicare card. This was the one exception to photo ID in the bill. That's why we sunsetted it. It was a compromise. We brought everyone to the table. We brought the clerks, we brought ARP, we brought the Secretary of State. And I think that's how we came out after this 3-year process. I've been involved in this issue with a really strong bill. And those 3 amendments coming up, I think that we had talked about those too. And for people that, I think the reason why we sunsetted that is that for people that have currently relinquished and do not have a driver's license, this provides us a period of time where they can then use that Medicare card. And while YDOT and that other provision is going to be sending out that, hey, if someone does relinquish in the future, then they need to get that ID card. So by 2030, I think we'd have this all kind of, it would work. And where it would be clear, it's going to work in the meantime, but it's going to be clear that, hey, you need to have that photo ID by 2030. So we provide that 9-year period, and that came out of that positive conversation with ARP. The other thing I wanted to say is so many basic things in life require ID, buying a alcoholic beverage, getting on an airplane, and yet something so important, our elections, no ID is required. And in every election cycle, I get so many calls on the day of the election. Why wasn't this asked for? A lot of concern about it. And so I think this bill is really important. It's been a 3-year process working on it. And I'd really ask the committee to move it forward. Thank you.
Okay. With that, committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 7? Representative Hunt, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quickly, and I apologize. Anyway, just concerning the driver's license issue, and I'm not sure who out there might know this, but does anybody have any numbers on how many residents of Wyoming don't have a driver's license, either because of socioeconomic circumstances or because of old age, and they've effectively had it revoked because of poor eyesight or whatever the case may be?
Well, we do have Miss Dobson. I pulled into the room and probably wasn't planning on testifying, but Miss Dobson from YDOT, do you have that information? Or Mr. Rossetti? Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Misty Dobson. I'm the program manager for driver services. Roughly right now, I can give you numbers. Obviously, 2020 has changed the number of credentials that we have out there, but right now we're looking at an average of about 430,000 drivers in the state of Wyoming. That doesn't include identification cards. The number of identification cards issued in 2019 was 4,600 approximately.
Okay. I hope that helps, Representative Hunt.
That does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Let me see if there's a motion on the bill, and then I'll get to the Secretary of State. Would anyone like to move the bill?
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Blackburn, seconded by Air. And Mr. Secretary, I know there were some questions and some things said. Any comments you'd like to provide?
On a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe Representative Gray answered the issue on the photo ID. The bill just lists IDs that have photos, and then the one that does not, to accommodate the elderly folks who may no longer have a driver's license or who are unable to get a state ID. And then in some of the comments you may have heard, we actually do allow people to register to vote by mail in Wyoming. So that's an accurate piece in the bill. It was on page 4 under that A Romanet 2. I think Ms. Simons had brought that issue up. The last thing I would say is this is not the only piece of legislation that we've all collaborated on. I heard a lot about, the real problem is voter apathy, and that's true. We've got a lot of things we're working on. We have, we're exempt from motor voter laws because we allow same-day registration. We have a youth voter initiative where we get out and travel the state to encourage young people to get involved. So we do everything we can in my office to encourage people to vote, show them how to register to vote, get more participation. So I bristle up a little bit when I hear comments that this is some type of effort to disenfranchise. I take that personally, and it's just not the case. We go out of our way and do everything in our power to encourage voter participation. Our processes are easy, and we have a great education effort out there as well. As far as integrity goes, it was mentioned, should we concentrate on other areas? Well, we are. There's a ballot harvesting bill, risk limiting audits, which were listed by Ms. Herman from the League of Women Voters. I've got a pilot project right now that's going to take place week after next, where I'm going to pilot risk limiting audits in a couple places to see how we can make our election processes even more secure. So this bill is just one piece of an ongoing comprehensive effort to keep Wyoming's elections safe and secure, while also offering the ultimate in accessibility and opportunity for our citizens. That's the goal. And this bill does nothing to diminish that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. All right, committee discussion on the bill. Any amendments anyone would like to propose? Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move the amendment that we received from the clerks.
Are you moving all three parts or one specific, Representative Duncan?
I believe they're kind of all inclusive on the sheet that we got. They're all within that one page, or should I break them up? They're
How do
pretty,
you want, if you want to move it, they're all on the same page. You can move them as a group.
let's move them as a group, please.
Is there a second? Seconded by Clifford. Okay, we're on an amendment discussion. On any part of the amendment, anyone wants to divide right now, let me know. Any discussion on the amendment at all?
Question.
Seeing no discussion and question being called, all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Well, that would be unanimous. All right, we're back on the bill. Other discussion or amendments from anyone on the committee?
Question on the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Clifford.
hi. I just wanted to comment before we go to vote, and I just feel it's my obligation to do so. And I'm in opposition of this bill, and I just feel we're truly unique in the fact that our country gives her people the right to decide its future. And to me, the right to vote in Wyoming means many things. I understand there was a historic voter turnout in Wyoming in this last election. And in my opinion, this bill does not help Wyoming voters realize that we are more powerful together than we are divided. It suppresses voter participation, I feel. It does not help our voices here in Wyoming speak when we show up in numbers and our vote becomes a force that can't be ignored. It doesn't unite us across generations with young and old helping each other to get out and vote. It's our privilege and it's our duty to cast our vote in this state, this great state of Wyoming. And I just feel it discourages voter access. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none at this time, Barb, if you would call the roll on House Bill 75.
Representative Blackburn,
Aye.
Representative Clausen,
No.
Representative Clifford,
No.
Representative Duncan,
Aye.
Representative Ayer,
Aye.
Representative Hunt,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Roscoe, is he? I didn't hear anything.
No.
Thank you. Chairman Zwanitzer,
Aye.
6-3.
Bill passes 6-3. Representative Gray, I assume you're floor managing the bill yourself. If you need any help, certainly let us know.
Sure.
Congratulations.
Thank you, the committee. Thank you.
Committee, we're going to take a 7-minute break and reconvene at 3:40 to hear the optometrist bill. And I'll bring people in at that time. So you're on a break for the next 7 minutes. I would encourage you to turn off your microphones and your videos. So committee, when you return, if you put your camera back on so I can know you're here. All right, it looks like we have a quorum back. So with that, the next bill before us this afternoon is House Bill 39, Optometrist Practice Act Amendments, brought to us from our own majority floor leader, Representative Summers. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, fellow committee members, I bring you House Bill 39, Optometrist Practice Act Amendments, and ask for your favorable consideration. Mr. Chairman, this bill updates the Practice Act for optometrists and ensures optometrists can treat patients in rural Wyoming to the full extent of their education and training. This Practice Act hasn't been updated in 25 years. This bill will allow qualified optometrists to perform procedures around the eye and in front of the eye, such as treating a sty or a skin tag, injections used for delivery of local anesthesia, and our medications would be allowed. Injections inside the eyeball are specifically prohibited. Currently, 21 other states allow such procedures, including Montana, Idaho, Utah, North Dakota, Colorado, and Mexico. This bill allows optometrists to perform non-invasive laser procedures around the eye and in the space in front of the eye. 3 specific procedures would be allowed: YAG capsulotomy, incision of the capsule of the lens; a peripheral iridotomy treats patients with narrow angle glaucoma and acute angle closure glaucoma; and a laser procedure that reduces intraocular pressure in patients with glaucoma. Currently, 5 states provide laser authority to optometrists. They are Oklahoma, Kentucky, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Alaska. This bill will allow optometrists to once again be able to prescribe hydrocodone and other drugs for the diagnosis and treatment of ocular abnormalities. Currently, 34 states allow hydrocodone. 11 states are like Wyoming, where the fix is needed after the FDA reclassification. Currently, 42 other states allow the other drugs for diagnosis and treatment of ocular abnormalities. Mr. Chairman, this bill prohibits more complicated eye surgeries, such as LASIK surgery, cataract surgery, or retinal surgeries, which require general anesthesia and a surgical center. This bill puts 2 new members on the Board of Optometry, one being a member of the public and the second being a licensed healthcare professional. Mr. Chairman, optometrists are licensed doctors who are held to the same legal standing as other licensed physicians. Optometrists undergo extensive undergraduate and professional medical education, including a 4-year doctorate program at an accredited school of optometry. Wyoming licensed doctors of optometry must provide certification in the non-laser and laser procedures to the state licensing board, either through national board exams or accredited continuing education. Past arguments against expansion of the Optometrist Practice Act are that only medical doctors should provide surgeries, yet we know dentists and podiatrists do surgeries as well. Optometrists are currently practicing in 22 of 23 counties in Wyoming, and this update of their Practice Act will provide Wyoming patients the ability to receive the latest healthcare innovations in their local communities with the doctors they know and trust. Mr. Chairman, this bill is important because it will allow more access to important eye care procedures right here in our local Wyoming communities. Mr. Chairman, I sent you a technical correction from LSO as a potential amendment. And Mr. Chairman, I will walk you through the bill.
Great.
And so, Mr. Chairman, if you all go to page 2, we go into 3323-101 definition, and this updates the definitions for optometry. Into subsection B, the practice of optometry occurs when a person employs primary human eye care procedures, including Romanet I, the examination, diagnosis, and treatment of diseases of the eye. Mr. Chairman, if we turn over to page 3, Romanet 2, measuring the powers and range of vision of the eye. Romanet 3, the adaptation cell, prescribing and dispensing of frames and lenses. Romanet 4, ordering and performance of diagnostic tests. Romanet 5, the prescribing and administration of pharmaceutical agents. Romanet 6, preoperative and postoperative care. Romanet 7, any laser procedure not excluded under subsection C of this section. And Mr. Chairman, at the bottom of page 3, that is a newly created subsection C. And it says the following procedures shall be excluded from the authorized practice of optometry. And Mr. Chairman, pages 4, 5, and 6 contain the list of procedures that optometrists are not allowed to perform. And so, Mr. Chairman, if we go to the bottom of page 6, really this begins a set of formatting issues, right? Reformatting based upon that we created a new subsection C, so we got to reformat all the rest of those subsections, and you will see that on pages 6, 7, and 8, and this is all existing language, just reformatting. And Mr. Chairman, if we move on to page 9, Mr. Chairman, we go into 3323-102, optometrist use of certain drugs. An optometrist shall be allowed to administer and prescribe pharmaceutical agents related to the practice of optometry. And down at the bottom, we have a new language allowing for the prescribing of hydrocodone or hydrocodone containing pharmaceutical agents. And Mr. Chairman, optometrists were part of Senate File 47, passed in 2019, which mandates continuing education for the responsible prescribing of controlled substances. The deletions remove the 48-hour time constraint. There are times when a longer course of drug treatment is needed. And Mr. Chairman, if we move over to page 10, and we go into 3323-104, Board of Examiners in Optometry, it expands the board makeup from 3 to 5 by adding a member of the public and a licensed healthcare professional. This provides more diversity of voices on the board. And Mr. Chairman, if we move on to page 11, the rest of the new language in the bill are proposed cleanups to out-of-date language. And like I said, it's been 25 years. And so, Mr. Chairman, in 3323-106, fines are deleted because the board does not have authority to issue fines. We go into 3323-109 at the bottom of page 11 over to the top of page 12. Subsection A, you can see the deletion of and the insertion of or. And this updated language to ensure more relevant tests may be utilized in the future. And lines 13 through 16 are deleted, and this is antiquated language. All optometrists are currently tested in therapeutic pharmaceuticals. And Mr. Chairman, if we move on to page 13, we go into 3323-114, continuing education courses required. This change allows the board to determine the continuing education by rule instead of through statute. And Mr. Chairman, as we move on to page 14, we get into the repealers, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, 3323-109B is grades required to pass the exams where practicing. This deletion is part of the board's suggested cleanup of language. 3323-109B is covered in 3323-109A. It would not be appropriate to have grading percentages in a statute when the pass rate is determined by the National Board of Examiners in Optometry. And then, and I have the language of that repealer if anybody wants to hear what that repealer actually says, that specific site. 3323-111B is the next repealer, is antiquated language on door-to-door selling of optometric services and language forbidding anyone without a license to practice optometry. And so 3323-111B, Romanet I through Romanet 3 is antiquated, and Romanet 4, which is the language forbidding anyone without a license to practice, is actually covered in 3323-103A, which is in statute, and it's not in this bill, so you can't see it. And I won't read the repealer unless people want me to. And then Mr. Mr. Chairman, the last repealer is 3323-117 is a volunteer license. This is duplicative language, a broad volunteer license statute passed the legislature in the 2018 session and resides in 3531-101. And Mr. Chairman, page 14, lines 18 through 21. Enactment date allows the rules process to be started immediately upon passage of the bill. Fairly common to try to start the rules before we implement the bill. And then page 15, lines 1 through 2, enactment date states the act will be effective July 1st, 2021. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions. There are experts in the room who will testify and answer the questions that I cannot, and I'm certain there'll be questions that I cannot answer, Mr. Chairman. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Committee, any questions for the representative bringing the bill at this time? Not Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if the bringer of the bill can answer this, but maybe it will set up in preparation for those waiting to testify, could possibly answer it if he can't. I would like to know, in this bill, do we have any provisions in place that, or in a plan that if in the event a procedure goes badly, and have a questionable outcome or a negative outcome, what is do we have anything in our bill that addresses that, in any of the procedures in the end? Do you have any answers for that?
Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I do not. I'm sure that the people following me will, and it's probably not it's not in this bill. It's likely an existing statute, or more likely in their within their, within their practices, within that board's rule. And that's my guess, but I do not know all the board rules, but there will be those that follow that will.
Okay. Thanks.
And I just want to say that, on the laser surgery, and I've kind of looked into this a little bit, at least 3 states that I know of that have done this, to date, at least from what I've found out, they've had no issues, no appeals to the board based on the laser surgery. But that's maybe it gets to where you were going at, but you would have to ask that of the optometrist. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think next we're going to welcome Ms. Klein, the Executive Director of Optometry. And Carrie, we have about an hour and 5 minutes to get through this bill. So, and I understand there are about 4 or 5 people, optometrists, et cetera, that are going to testify for the bill. And so I'm just going to give you each about 5 minutes. So roughly schedule your time accordingly. But good to see you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Carrie Klein, and I'm the Executive Director for the Wyoming Optometric Association. I'm here today to answer questions. I want to introduce to you who we have here today. We have Dr. Dana Day, who will be presenting some prepared remarks. We have Dr. Jeremy Nett, Catherine Wilkinson, who will be presenting amendments, and Jonathan Downing. And I do believe that the State Board of Optometry will be here as well to answer any further questions such that Representative Duncan just asked on board authority. And so if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Dr. Day now for him to begin.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Day.
I'm here, just getting the video. There we go. All right, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Dana Day. I am an optometrist with practices in Casper and Douglas. I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming Optometric Association and over 100 Wyoming doctors of optometry to ask for your favorable support on House Bill 39. Specifically, we are asking for the ability to better serve our patients and their eye care needs. House Bill 39 will change the optometric scope of practice by removing some antiquated language, expanding the Board of Examiners in optometry from 3 to 5 members, removing some therapeutic prescribing restrictions, and allow for additional low complexity in-office-based procedures. The last update is Representative Summers mentioned was in 1995. The maps that we provided to this committee serve as a visual reference regarding how Wyoming has fallen woefully behind other states in treatment and services a doctor of optometry is capable of providing. The current Wyoming Optometric Practice Act is limiting the options available to our patients. We provide 98% of primary eye care in Wyoming. Resident optometry offices are located in 22 of 23 counties. In addition to providing glasses and contact lens prescriptions, we use modern technology to diagnose and treat eye disease, manage preoperative and postoperative surgical care, provide binocular vision, low vision, and visual rehabilitation services. Many Wyoming doctors of optometry provide both vision and therapeutic eye care at their local assisted living facilities, nursing homes, and hospitals. We are available to our patients for emergency care. We are essential providers in the delivery of healthcare, which became even more evident during our recent pandemic. Nationally, doctors of optometry provided 206,000 urgent and emergent care services at the height of March's pandemic lockdowns, thus diverting vulnerable populations away from overburdened emergency departments. Our opponents will attempt to convince you that we lack the education and diagnostic skill required to support a change in our Optometric Practice Act. They will use flawed reports, anecdotal accusations, and cherry-picked cases to elicit fear in you as a means of stopping House Bill 39. Optometrists are doctoral level professionals who first complete undergraduate degrees and prerequisites before completing 4 additional years of rigorous didactic and clinical training specializing in the eye. We begin direct patient care in our first year under the supervision of attending doctors and continue to receive thousands of hours of supervised clinical education before receiving our degrees. We must demonstrate our competency through a series of national board exams composed of written and practical portions, including the office-based procedures as outlined in House Bill 39. We are also required by statute to receive 40 hours of continuing education every 2 years, with 3 of those hours dedicated to education on the proper prescribing of opioids. Aestheticians, tattoo artists, and acupuncturists are currently allowed to perform needle-based procedures around the eye, yet we find ourselves here today as eye care specialists, having been recognized as physicians under Medicare, asking for privileges similar to those being rendered by occupations with far less education, training, and oversight. The opposition maintains the position that we should not be allowed to do surgery. I have primary care and emergency room physicians who refer their acute red cases to me for diagnosis and treatment, which quite often result in the removal of metallic foreign bodies from the delicate front tissues of the eye. This, like other low complexity in-office procedures that we currently perform, are considered to be surgical procedures by coding and billing. So it is erroneous to say that optometrists can't or shouldn't do surgery. We already do. House Bill 39 will allow for 3 non-invasive laser procedures that have not previously been performed by optometrists in Wyoming. These are performed with topical anesthesia, take just a few short minutes, and do not require an operating room. The argument that doctors of optometry can't safely perform these laser procedures is not supported when you look at the affidavits from the states of Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Louisiana, where they have performed over 100,000 combined procedures and have not received 1 complaint to their respective regulatory boards. Additionally, malpractice insurance rates in these states remain low and consistent with all other states where these procedures are not yet performed by doctors of optometry. Low malpractice insurance rates assessed to doctors of optometry testify to the care and caution used in treating patients. Learning to perform these procedures is based upon the many years of education that resulted in a doctorate in optometry. Certification in the use of the laser equipment through fully accredited continuing education courses follows the same medical model that all practitioners use when a new procedure is added to their particular field of interest. Annual certified continuing education required for license renewal serves to ensure continual diagnostic and didactic proficiency. Changes to healthcare, such as new medication or new technology to diagnose or new ways to provide care to a patient, is a constant. Healthcare professions such as optometry, dentistry, physician assistants, and nurse practitioners were all created by legislative bodies such as this in order to better serve the public need. Archaic scope of practice acts will lead to stagnation and archaic healthcare. I am obligated to keep up with the latest technology in my field through continuing education and certification. My patients deserve no less. So it does become necessary to make adjustments in professions practice acts to allow for that process to take place. Because Wyoming is so rural, we know that access to specialized care is an issue. House Bill 39 will increase a patient's access to additional eye care service delivered locally. With only 8 resident ophthalmologists in Wyoming, our patients have to travel large distances, either in-state or elect to travel out of state, which increases their healthcare costs. House Bill 39 will give patients increased access and expand options in where they can receive healthcare services. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the need for patients to have these options and access to care in the communities where they live. We have many resident students whose professional education is being subsidized by programs such as WWAMI and WICHE. But by updating the Optometric Practice Act, it will help ensure that Wyoming is a place that newly graduated doctors of optometry will want to return to and serve patients using the education they have received to its full extent. As both our healthcare providers and patients age, we want to be attracting the best and the brightest back to our home state. Wyoming doctors of optometry are careful in making good and ethical recommendations to their patients. Patient safety has always been at the center of all treatment decisions that we make as doctors of optometry. We too take similar do no harm oaths at graduation. We are overseen by a governor-appointed board of examiners who provide accountability and set forth requirements for patient safety and professional conduct. We understand and expect to be investigated and sanctioned through this process if we fail to treat our patients according to the accepted standard of care. I ask you to vote yes on House Bill 39. Thank you again for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And thank you, Dr. Day. And I do understand this was a controversial issue in previous years, not really in this committee. But for the health of the institution, we probably shouldn't refer to the people against the bill as the opposition or our opponents or politically charged words. So is there any questions for Dr. Day? Any questions this time? Not seeing any right now, Doctor, but don't go too far. I think Dr. Cruz is also going to talk. If you're up next, Dr. Cruz. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me and
Yes,
see me? Okay. Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Kent Cruz. I'm an ophthalmologist and a retina specialist. I've been at the Eye Center in Northern Colorado for the last 24 years. I'm board certified in ophthalmology, fellowship trained in vitreoretinal surgery. I'm licensed in both Wyoming and Colorado. I have a sizable Wyoming patient population that frankly I really enjoy taking care of. They're great people. I'm wearing my Wyoming cowboy shirt today.
Nice.
Wyoming patients by and large are very appreciative and compliant. And whenever I see someone from Wyoming, a new patient on my schedule, I gotta be honest, it brings a smile to my face because usually it's gonna be a pleasant experience for both me and the patient. My daughter, Kelly, is finishing her 3rd year of optometry at Ohio State, which I consider to be one of the best optometry programs in the nation. I have a daughter, Haley, who will be graduating with her Bachelor of Science nursing degree from the University of Wyoming in May. So I paid a lot of money for this shirt. She's currently working in the recovery room and on the neural floor at Wyoming Medical Center, and she's had a fantastic experience at the University of Wyoming and is even talking about not coming home to Colorado, much to the chagrin of my wife. So you may be asking yourselves, why am I here? So last week, the chairman, executive officer, chief executive officer of the Eye Center, Dan Carpel, was contacted by the Wyoming Optometry Society. The Eye Center has a large and increasing presence in the state of Wyoming. We have 15 ophthalmologists and 10 optometrists who work together shoulder to shoulder every day. We recently merged with the Cheyenne Eye Clinic, bringing 2 ophthalmologists and 2 optometrists under that umbrella. Frankly, there's been a complete impasse between Wyoming ophthalmology and the Wyoming Medical Society and optometry. There is deep distrust between these 2 specialties. These scope of practice battles have been going on for 50 years. I can assure you there is no white knight in this scenario. There are villains on both sides. The optometrist in Wyoming asked if there was any MD at the eye center who could engage in the process and make an effort to break the deadlock. And for the reasons I've listed above, Dan felt that I was a good choice. Neither side is going to agree with me, but I have been given free rein to speak by the optometrists, and that is much to their credit. One of my stipulations for appearing today is that there would be no handcuffs on what I could say. I will tell you, though, I will be vilified by some on both sides, and I will permanently lose referrals from both sides. But today I'm going to try to be impartial, practical, and honest. I'll strive to limit my comments to important topics, but these are complex issues. If I'm willing to do permanent harm to my reputation and my referral base, I think it's worth 15 minutes of your time. Dr. Schaefer has agreed to limit his comments to give me additional time, and that is to his credit and my ophthalmology colleagues. So moving on specifically to scope of practice. Ophthalmology has taken a hardline stance against optometrists performing any kind of surgical procedure, even minor ones. Patient safety versus access to care have been the major opposing viewpoints. I assure you there are less noble factors at play, but these are the ones that are front and center. Optometrists believe that these minimally invasive procedures fall within their scope as primary eye care providers. Optometry is not and never will be a surgical profession. Optometrists are not trained in surgical procedures on live patients. Current optometric laser training uses simulators on artificial eyes. My daughter has been trained at the University of Ohio and can in fact become board certified in YAG capsulotomy, YAG iridectomy, and YAG SLT with never actually having performed a procedure on a patient. She was instructed by optometrists, professors who themselves have never performed these procedures. So this is a sharp departure from every other field of medicine, nursing, dentistry, what have you. But I can also assure you, I can teach my daughter, and probably will someday, how to perform these laser procedures, and she will do it with skill and safety if she has such privileges. But not many optometrists have an ophthalmologist parent. An MD degree does not impart magical abilities to perform surgery. It's basically a ticket into another 4 to 8 years of academic hospital-based training in a chosen surgical discipline, 5 years in my case. Surgical procedures range from minor low risk to very complex high risk. Non-surgeons perform some minor low risk procedures, and this has been a trend, an increasing trend over recent years. Your family doctor can remove a mole and do it safely, but they can't replace your heart valve. Invasive and riskier procedures require extensive training over many years. In fact, today I saw my post-ops before this meeting, and I've performed surgery yesterday that's 100 times more complicated than any of these YAG procedures that are being entertained. But there's also 100 times greater risk. One patient had a dislocated implant from a botched cataract surgery done in Nebraska. She was in tears today because I was able to fix her, and she's going to do great. Scope expansion involves risk. As stated earlier, primum non nocere, first do no harm, is the fundamental tenet of the Hippocratic Oath, and that doesn't apply just to MDs. Doctors in training, regardless of specialty, harm patients as they learn. This is especially true if the doctor has no prior experience in such procedures. Surgery is a master-apprentice relationship, and good surgeons quickly learn from their mistakes and take corrective action. But bad surgeons keep committing the same errors over and over. Although complications from YAG laser are uncommon, I strongly disagree with the statement that there have been no complications in the aforementioned stage. That is simply mathematically impossible. If you perform 100,000 YAG procedures, I guarantee you there are going to be significant complications. So I'm sorry, but that has no basis in reality. In response to the previous question about complications, any complication from these procedures is going to have to be handled by an ophthalmologist. That is a fact. And this does violate an axiom that I learned as a surgical resident. You don't perform any operation where you can't handle the complications. Any increase in privileges will result in injury. This is incontestable. Wyoming citizens will be harmed, and we all have to come to grips with that reality. Ophthalmology, optometry, and you as legislators. You are lowering established training standards in the name of patient convenience. 99% of these procedures are elective. It's quite rare that an emergency YAG laser is necessary. So the benefit to society must outweigh the harm that some individuals will suffer. My goal in being here is to minimize that harm, since it appears to me inevitable that optometrists will gain these privileges in Wyoming. I have spoken at length to my optometric colleagues, and I've stated bluntly that aggressive oversight by the Wyoming Board of Optometry is crucial, and patients need to have an open door to the Wyoming Board. Ophthalmology needs to have a voice in this oversight. If an optometrist is causing harm, they need to be sanctioned and undergo additional training. Further infractions should result in permanent revocation of privileges. I tell you, if there are no disciplinary actions taken by the Board of Optometry over these procedures in the next few years, that to me indicates a total failure in oversight, and we should all be paying attention. Establishing appropriate training is very important, and I've also discussed this with my optometric colleagues. If optometrists are going to perform these minor laser procedures, then appropriate proctoring is needed. I've engaged in a discussion with a Wyoming optometrist on setting up supervised proctoring on live patients before an optometrist is given permission to go out in the community and perform these procedures. I have been assured I'll have a voice in these discussions, and I believe my optometric colleagues are being sincere. Another issue is the economics of medicine. YAG lasers are expensive and they have a limited lifespan. We have 2 YAG lasers for our entire enterprise in Colorado. That's 15 ophthalmologists. The one that we have in Greeley recently began to malfunction. And when these lasers fail, the power output starts to become pretty unpredictable. It's usually not enough power, but sometimes it can spike and put out way too much. We decided this laser was unsafe and we replaced it for another one, $75,000. In order to pay for this device, you have to perform at least 135 lasers just to cover your costs. That's going to be very hard to do in a rural setting. It creates a moral hazard where economics start to drive clinical decisions. This is not in any way unique to optometry. It's a universal truth in healthcare. Unless you have what we call a laser in a van that comes by once a month, it makes no economic sense for a small optometry practice. And then you lose the argument about emergency access in those rare situations where YAG peripheral iridectomy can lower pressure. In fact, the situation in Oklahoma bears testament to this fact, which was the first state to pass YAG privileges for optometrists. The large majority of optometric lasers are performed in urban settings where ophthalmologists are readily available. So the rural argument starts to lose a little bit of traction. In addition, the economics of healthcare really bear almost no relation to the free market. Surgeons' fees are established by CMS in committee in Washington. Increased competition does not drive down costs, but it does increase the number of procedures performed. This has been proven time and again. As far as future scope expansion, this is the great fear and the great unknown for ophthalmologists and my colleagues, many of whom are not happy that I'm speaking today, and some, in fact, asked me not to testify. But I'm here because I feel it's the right thing to do. But the concern is this will be a never-ending battle of legislation for scope expansion. Now, my optometry colleagues have assured me that this is largely the extent of their aspiration for years to come. And they recognize the fact that expansion into riskier procedures is inappropriate, it's unethical, and it's frankly dangerous. I engaged and helped to amend the language of the current bill to place unambiguous and accurate language in the exclusionary clauses. But truthfully, I would prefer that these laser privileges be granted by inclusion. Using exclusionary language alone is not standard in surgery, and it goes against longstanding precedent. I'm not an attorney, and I did discuss this with legal counsel. This potentially leaves exploitable loopholes for future scope expansion without regulatory oversight. I realize exclusionary language is expedient and convenient, but does it really serve the best interests of the people of Wyoming? I think not. I also believe in transparency. Every patient has a right to know their doctor's training, degree, credentials, and certification. You can easily access my credentials on the internet. This issue should not be open for debate. Truthfully, I'm hoping that if these privileges are granted, that it puts an end to further legislative efforts. And I'll be watching closely. And I guarantee you, and I've told my optometric colleagues, I will return to fight aggressively against expansion into those surgical procedures that pose ever greater risk to patients. So in conclusion, I want to change the way ophthalmology and optometry relate and interact. The vitriol and vilification coming from both sides needs to stop. I want to make sure that through all of this, patients are put first. And finally, I'm here for my daughter. She's a smart young lady and she could have gone to medical school, but she chose not to. Optometry was a better fit for her life's goals. And I steered her towards optometry because I think it's a fantastic profession. It plays a critical role in the delivery of frontline eye care. And I'm really excited for her to come back and hopefully someday practice alongside me. I feel it is my duty and my desire to leave her with a better, more collegial environment than the one that I entered 30 years ago. Thank you for your dedication to the people of Wyoming and your attention to the issue at hand. I'm available to take questions now or at any time in the future.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Certainly appreciate the testimony and the risk that you take by trying to help a legislative political committee who aren't medical professionals try to understand the variables at risk here. Any questions for Dr. Cruz at this time? I'm not seeing any right now, Doctor, but don't go too far. If you do have another half an hour to stay with us, we might have some coming up here.
Glad to.
Thank you. With that, we're going to go over to Dr. Net. That's okay. Jeremy, if you're available. And then we'll hear from Ms. Lancaster after that. Welcome, Dr. Net.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Dr. Jeremy Net. I have practices in Cheyenne and Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. I'd just like to quickly discuss some of the issues that were mentioned by Dr. Cruz. As far as no complaints to the board for the laser procedures that have been performed, there were definitely complications. So any surgical procedure is going to have complications. But we're already managing those complications in post-op patients. Granted, there may be times when we need to reach out to our surgical colleagues to assist us. We're already well trained in the management of complications from these procedures because we're already doing them. Another thing that was mentioned was the cost of the equipment. And so YAG lasers range in cost from about $10,000 to $25,000. To put that in perspective, we spend $75,000 to $100,000 on diagnostic equipment that also doesn't reimburse so great. But care is more important than profits sometimes. And so I have instruments in my office that I don't make money on, but they allow me to provide better care for my patients. And so I don't know if we can say the cost of the machinery is prohibitive and why we shouldn't be allowed to perform these procedures. The last thing I'd like to mention is that in the states that are performing this already, there have been no increases in malpractice costs because there have been, as far as I'm aware of, no cases to the board where insurance companies are determining that this is risky and increasing our rates for malpractice insurance. Any questions?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ned. Any questions? Not seeing at this time. Don't go too far, though, if that's okay. With that, Ms. Lancaster, you'll be up next. Oh,
thank you,
Lancaster.
I'm Mr. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Courtney Lancaster. I'm born and raised in Rock Springs. I'm a son of a coal miner, and my mother worked different secretarial positions. I am currently finishing my third year of optometry school at the Kentucky College of Optometry. And I chose to attend KICO, as we call it, because of the potential that it possessed for me to learn the full scope of optometry here. The people that, the optometrists that do teach us these laser procedures have performed them in Kentucky. They perform them in our school's operatorium they have here. And yeah, here at KICO, we're not only educated on the basic medical and optometric sciences, we're instructed in advanced procedures that have been mentioned. I've taken the We have 2 courses. The last semester was our laser course, and we, as I said, performed them on the model eyes. And this semester we're working more on the minor procedures around the eye. With the lasers, we learn about the laser properties, how they work and how they affect the eye, as well as the different types of lasers that can be used in the different procedures. We are trained on how to properly perform the procedures, pre and post operation protocols, and any troubleshooting techniques / protocols to follow if any issues should arise. Here in Kentucky, we're given the opportunity to have our 4th year externships at sites. That'll give us the opportunities to perform these procedures. As I personally will have the opportunity to be at the school rotation and have that opportunity to perform some laser procedures myself. My main goal after graduation is to return to Wyoming. As I said, born and raised Rock Springs. I love the state, and I want to help the people there with the full extent of my education and training. In Rock Springs, there's the culture that you need to travel mostly for certain procedures. I mean, there will always be something that you have to travel out of state for. But my hope is that passing this bill will be able to bring ease to the patients' lives, and they can receive those minimally invasive procedures locally, and sparing the expenses of long trips out of town. And with that, I just ask for your vote of yes on this bill, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. Let me ask you one quickly. Have you seen, in operating these lasers, have you had a live patient, or is that part of the 4th year when you go out and do an apprenticeship type thing?
So that is part of the 4th year rotation. So I was just talking to my surgery professor, and he was mentioning that one of the 4th years now, she was able to perform 30 to 35 procedures herself at her 4th year rotation.
But I would be correct, though, that was under an ophthalmologist supervising while she was.
It could have been an optometrist. I'm not sure on the details, but it could have been an optometrist here in Kentucky.
Thanks. Further questions to Mr. Lancaster? Not seeing at this time. Thank you for zooming into us today, Courtney. Appreciate it. I think Ms. Foland is coming back for another testimony on a bill.
Am I here?
You are here, Ms. Foland. We're on optometry.
Oh my gosh. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you today. I am a patient who has had cataract surgery on both eyes in 2016 at a relatively young age. And then subsequently had the YAG surgery. Mine was an emergency, and my sight was almost to a point where I would have been legally blind and not able to drive. I'm a complicated patient. At the time I was living in Casper, and my optometrist was absolutely phenomenal. He was able to arrange a trip for me to the Eye Center of Northern Colorado, where Dr. Cruz was just testifying from, except I saw Dr. Foster. My challenge at the time was, it was winter. It was November. And my husband and I, because I could not drive alone, were both required to take off 6 days of work. While my husband is a salaried employee, I am in private practice as a mental health professional. So if I'm not seeing clients, I don't make any money. So I lost an entire week of revenue to have to drive, and we were required to stay overnight in Colorado because I-25 was closed. Had my optometrist been able to provide that YAG surgery as soon as I was diagnosed to need it, my life would have been much less complicated financially, emotionally. At 54 years of age, I was not looking forward to being blind. As Dr. Cruz identified, there is risk. There is risk with every procedure that we do. And this bill would have allowed me the opportunity to have that surgery by a competent and capable professional who I already had a relationship, a professional relationship with, a person who I trust with my eyes. So I encourage the committee to approve this bill and pass it on. And I stand for any questions.
All right, questions for Ms. Foland? Not seeing any at this time, Cheryl, but thanks for sticking with us and sharing that it is difficult in rural Wyoming to get adequate care for many different specialties, certainly. And with that, we do have about 9 people in the waiting room. I know some are just waiting for the next bill. Is there anyone else in the waiting room? I think Dr. Carpel's there who wants to testify on this bill. If so, please hit that blue hand. I'll let in Ms. Bush, Mr. Ramey. Real quick, I'm going to go to Kobe Ramsey first. As soon as they log in here. Welcome.
Hi.
Mr. Ramsey. Floor is yours.
Chairman. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mr. Chairman and committee. Glad to see you. You all look great on Zoom. Of course, we all look good with our background. I'd like to thank you for having us here today. My name is Kobe Ramsey. I am the current president of the Wyoming Board of Examiners in Optometry. Just want to state that the role of Board of Optometry is to ensure patient safety and set forth requirements as it relates to licensure and discipline of an optometrist and the regulation of the practice of optometry. We take our duties very seriously, and we are number one on our list every day is to protect the patients of Wyoming. As a member of the board, I am duty bound to protect the citizens of Wyoming, ensuring their safety. As a president of the board, when this statute passes, my instructions to the members of the board are to develop stringent reporting guidelines and regulations that will include didactic requirements, proof of hands-on mastery, and disciplinary repercussions for less than exemplary performances. The requirements we have discussed will ensure that doctors who choose to perform these procedures are vetted and trained. I want to just circle back to Representative Duncan. You had a question about what do we do if there's a bad outcome. Currently in our statute 3323-110, Roman numerat 7, it basically says that, the board can revoke or suspend a license. And under that one, it says for incompetence, malpractice, or unethical conduct. So under that definition, if someone has performed the surgery and has done it in an incompetent manner or has not followed the guidelines that is going to be set forth in rules and regulations, then they could forfeit their license. So we already have a mechanism in place to make sure that anyone who doesn't follow the guidelines set forth by the board will be punished, and they could be severely punished. I'd like to double back also to Dr. Cruz and his willingness to help. We've been reaching out to the states that have already been doing it. Oklahoma has been doing these procedures for 20 years at their school, and they are actually doing it on live patients for the students that are there. So all the students that have come out of Oklahoma have actually, while they were there, did the procedures. Last time when this bill was up, we looked to see what was considered competence, and the earliest I could find, or the closest to our time frame now, was 2017, 2018. And in order to be deemed competent by the surgical standards of the one school that we were able to find, it was 4 procedures. So as we move forward, we have reached out to the state of Oklahoma optometrist and the school there. We'd be more than happy to have Dr. Cruz be a proctor site to help us make sure everyone knows what they're doing in handling the laser, performing the procedures. And at that, I think that was all the questions that I heard that I could answer ahead of time. But if there are any other questions for the board, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Ramsey? I have two questions for you though, Doctor.
Sure.
One is, under this bill, it expands your board into 5 members. Any thoughts on that one way or another? And any thoughts on if one of those additions was an ophthalmologist, would that be a conflict of putting one of those on the optometry board in your opinion?
First one, thank you. We could use the help. You know, I think the reason we had 3 for so long was it was a financial concern. But we'd love to have the help. And I would love to have anybody from the public and anybody from any ancillary health profession. As far as any ophthalmologist, any ophthalmologist wants to join up and the governor feels they'd be a good fit, I don't have a problem with that, as long as they understand that the primary function of our board is not anything more than to protect the public. If we're doing that, then I welcome anybody who wants to do that.
Okay. Other questions from the committee? Not seeing it this time. Thank you very much, Mr. Ramsey, for being here.
Thank you for your time, Chairman.
Next up, Sean Schaefer. And I will give a couple of you, I know some hands raised, an opportunity to testify again after the first round. With that, welcome, Mr. Schaefer.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I thank you for giving me an opportunity to be here today. My name is Sean Schaefer. I'm an ophthalmologist. I'm in Laramie. I'm president of the Wyoming Ophthalmology Society. I've been a physician and a surgeon for over 30 years, and I've really enjoyed my time here in Wyoming. I want to say that I don't agree with Dr. Cruz that the passage of this bill is inevitable, but otherwise, I agree with what was said by Dr. Cruz in his testimony, on behalf of optometry. And because of what he said, I oppose Bill 39. I mean, as a physician and you as legislators were sworn to protect all Wyoming residents from harm. One harmed patient for convenience to me isn't tolerable. Instead of repeating anything else that Dr. Cruz said, because I've already told you I agree that there will be harm for convenience, I'm going to end here and ask for any questions.
All right, any questions for Dr. Schaefer? Seeing none at this time. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Ms. Bush from the Wyoming Medical Society, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Certainly can.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Sheila Bush and I represent the Wyoming Medical Society. We're an organization that represents Wyoming physicians and PAs. As you all know on this committee, we have a long history of scope expansion fights. And most of you anticipate me coming with a myriad of talking points in opposition. And so you'll be happy to learn that that's not what I'm here to do today. Instead, I'm here to talk with you a little bit about the nuance of our position and earn, hopefully, your favorable consideration of an amendment that we have for your consideration. So with that, the Medical Society has long opposed many scope expansion efforts, and we do so in the name of patient safety. And we haven't changed our mind about that. However, we also feel we have a deep obligation to listen and respect what we hear. And recognizing that we're in year 3 of this debate, we respect that we do believe it is the will of the legislature to have this go forward. And in doing so, we want to be here to mend some bridges. Patient safety is critical, and the professional and their training who does the procedure is a key component of that. However, an essential critical component is also that members of a healthcare team who were designed to work in partnership have a healthy relationship, work together, and function in a functional way on that team. And fights like this one that persist year over year do great harm to patient safety. And so the Medical Society is here today to tell you we're not opposing this bill. and instead ask your favorable consideration of an amendment before you that lends itself to criteria and requirements around transparency. To underscore a little bit of the importance of transparency, the American Medical Association for over a decade now has had a truth in advertising campaign. In fact, in 2011, the Medical Society attempted to run a bill, House Bill 201, I think, for a comprehensive sweeping language in truth in advertising. That was not a successful endeavor on our part, and so we're back here today to have the conversation again. Instead of a wide sweeping bill this session, we instead are taking baby steps, and as each profession opens their own act, we're asking your favorable consideration of putting some bare minimum transparency requirements in each of the acts, and we fully intend this to universally apply across the healthcare profession, including our own members and physicians. In fact, yesterday we have amended very similar language into the PA bill. The American Medical Association, in their campaign around truth in advertising, has done a number of surveys starting in 2008, and the latest being in 2018, around patient understanding, sometimes confusion among the professions. And so, relevant to this issue today, this data shows that 47% of the surveyed population, with a 95% confidence rate, 47 of those patients believe that an optometrist was a medically trained physician. 43% of that same group believed that an optometrist was not a medically trained physician. And so this goes to the heart of some of the confusion in the patient population. And so our question of you is, recognizing that we understand there's great support for this effort and recognizing we are not here to stand in the way of it, we do beg your favorable consideration of our amendments so that we can hopefully give patients the ability and the information that they need to make decisions about their own healthcare. And so the amendment before you, I believe, was emailed to you this morning, is an effort to put transparency requirements in advertising, to require a name badge that a patient can clearly delineate or understand the training of their caregiver, as well as in this situation, because eye care is a field in which optometry and ophthalmology are designed to work in very close partnership, a provision that says in an eye clinic that has a comprehensive service offering where ophthalmology and optometry work hand in hand, that there be a posting for patients to see when it is physicians are on site and when they're not. They're regularly scheduled hours. Often, certainly here in the southern part of the state and other states, you will have clinics where an ophthalmologist is in certain days of the week to do procedures, and the rest of the time really is your frontline optometric care, which is appropriate and the way it's designed to work. And so our request in that same amendment that I hopefully that you have before you is to just give some clarity and transparency to the patient population about when those physicians are there and when they're not. So with that, I will close and just offer again, respectfully, this is difficult. The Medical Society, I am sure I'm in a little bit of trouble with some members watching today that don't believe we're on the right side of this, that compromise is not the way to go. But I'm here to tell you that I think we are on the right side of this. Our board has voted for this to be our position, and we do feel deeply invested in mending the bridges between these professions, building trust again, and allowing Lyme patients to get the care they deserve, which is from a partnership in the eye healthcare team. And so with that, I will close and stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Questions for the Medical Society? Not seeing any right now. Sheila, also note to the people in the lobby, I know Representative Sweeney, we're just not going to get to the next bill this afternoon. So if you're here for the sewer water transfer bill, we'll just hold that until the first week of session next week. With that, Ms. Wilkinson, let me just do one more call for anyone else in the lobby who does wish to testify on the Optometrist Practice Act Amendment Bill 39. Please raise your hand. While I'm waiting, Ms. Wilkinson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Wilkinson. I'm here today representing the Wyoming Optometric Association. Mr. Chairman, in the with the time, I will be very brief. My comments today are just around 2 amendments that we would like to propose to the committee for consideration when you take up in working the bill. They've both been emailed to you. The first amendment that I would like the committee to consider is the medical clarification terminology that Dr. Cruz graciously worked with the Wyoming Optometric Association. We are in full support of making sure that the bill terminology is medically accurate and would ask that you do move that amendment, please. And it is the first 4 bullet points are simply clarifying in the exclusion list words that had the incorrect terminology in it. On page 9, line 9 is in the pharmaceutical section of the bill. Again, just clarifying that those pharmaceuticals can be for the treatment of ocular disease. And so, Mr. Chairman, we would very much ask that the committee do adopt those amendments when you're considering the bill. The second amendment that I have for you all is in regard to the transparency amendment just discussed by Ms. Bush. And Mr. Chairman, we greatly appreciate the olive branch that has been extended, and we appreciate that the Wyoming Medical Society is working to improve this bill. We are in full support of the intent and the spirit of that amendment. We do, however, think that it was more appropriate to be in rules rather than laid out in statute, but we would leave that to the committee to make a policy decision. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Wilkinson? Not seeing any right now, Catherine. If the bill moves, we'll discuss those amendments at the appropriate time. Representative Sweeney is asking to testify on this bill, so let me bring him in real fast. As a state legislator, I need to give him deference. Representative Sweeney, do you have thoughts on the optometry bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, if you'd allow me.
Couple minutes.
Thank you. Very, very much in favor of this. I recently had a situation here in actually Casper, Wyoming, that unfortunately my ophthalmologist was out ill. During the process, I had to wait approximately 1.5 to 2 months to see him. And in the meantime, went to the optometrist who really took care of the situation to a point. And I had to finish off, and it simply could have been alleviated. The problem could have been alleviated, I believe, through the optometrist if the scope of practice was allowed. And that was simply a sty. And the optometrist currently cannot lance to alleviate the pressure and the infection. And through this broadening of scope of work, I believe the optometrist could could have taken care of this situation if this bill was in place. So I ask the committee's favorable approval. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative Sweeney. Any questions for Pat? Not seeing any. I know, Dr. Cruz, you had your hand up multiple times. Is there any 30-second rebuttal or information you need to throw back at us real quick?
No, I don't have a rebuttal. I just wanted to say, trying to turn my camera on here, that my presence here was to try and educate the legislature and to be a resource for you. I am not here either to support or oppose this bill. I am simply here to provide education and be a resource. And I am, as you know, I am not anti-optometry and pro-ophthalmology. I see the benefits and the value of both professions, but we just need to be very, very careful that we are doing this correctly and taking appropriate steps. And I look forward to working with my optometry colleagues to make sure that we do this well and we serve our patient population well. But again, I just wanted to say that I was here basically to try and shed some light on the reality of the situation. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. And from your testimony, that's certainly how I took it, that you were involved, and not, let's say, neutral, but trying to work for the best for the citizens of Wyoming, and you're not even in our state. So my appreciation to you. With that, committee, what is your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Clausen, seconded by Representative Hunt. Committee, is there discussion, amendments? There's a couple before us. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would propose the amendment which was discussed by Ms. Sheila Bush of the Wyoming Medical Society. It was emailed earlier. It has the last 4 digits of 3501 and talks about advertising display of license requirements, as well as wearing of name tags and licenses with collaborative practice agreements.
That would be 3323-113 edition. Is there a second? Seconded by Roscoe. Is there discussion on the amendment, committee? I do have a question. Maybe Ms. Bush, are you still in my, you are. When you said this was brought on the physician assistance bill yesterday, this was for a statutory change in the PA Act. Could you clarify that for me?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that is true. So a variety of our current healthcare licensure acts have different language in different sections, some in rules, some in statute. And so this amendment is an attempt to put consistent language throughout statute in each of the healthcare profession bills so that we have consistency and we can set an expectation around an elevated transparency threshold. So the language looks a little different between what was in the PA bill yesterday and what's being put in front of you today, only because we're trying to amend the PA language yesterday to remove a provision around an annual update.
But it was statutory. That was my only real question. I hate to make the lobby for it. All right.
No, you're good.
Appreciate it, Sheila. All right, further discussion. All right, all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That amendment is passed. We're back on the bill. Further amendments committee. I know Ms. Wilkinson talked about one that Dr. Cruz worked on, and I will give you some time, Representative Summers. I guess no one's moving an amendment right now. So Representative Summers, do you have some comments?
Mr. Chairman, I brought, I sent out to the committee that technical correction amendment. I think that's a pretty easy, it's just a bad site in the original bill. It needs to be a different site. So I think you have that. It's like 401 is the last 3 digits on that, or 1401 is the last 4 digits. So really, Mr. Chairman, what it does is it goes
Let me get someone on the committee to move it, Representative Summers. And as a chairman, I can't do so. Okay, moved by Representative Ayer, seconded by Representative Clifford. Now, if you want to explain it, Representative Summers, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, it's just a site. Instead of 3323-117, it should have been 3323-116 in the sites, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment committee? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. And that looks unanimous, or at least a majority. All right, back on the bill. Further amendments. Again, process says I can't move amendments, but there is one that Ms. Wilkinson talked about that seemed to be an agreeable amendment to all parties on some language changes. Representative Lawson?
I'll move that. I'll move the amendment.
Okay, seconded by Representative Blackburn. Committee that came from Ms. Wilkinson at 6:43 p.m. last night. Any discussion on that amendment?
Chairman Zwanitzer, I do not have that amendment.
I will forward it to you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion, committee? Seeing none, all in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. That amendment has passed. Any further discussion or amendments on the bill? If Anybody feel so inclined to change the board of optometry? Feel free to move that. Seeing anyone wish to discuss or have some last thoughts before I call for the vote? We do have about 7 minutes. I was rushing there and all of a sudden I thought we'd have more discussion and you all got worn down.
Question on the bill.
Okay. Question being called and seeing no further discussion from anyone on the committee. Barb, if you would call the roll.
Okay, Representative Blackburn,
Aye.
Representative Clausen,
Aye.
Representative Clifford,
Aye.
Representative Duncan,
Aye.
Representative Ayer,
Aye.
Representative Hunt,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
No.
Representative Roscoe,
Aye.
Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye.
Bill passes with amendment.
All right, and Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I believe you're carrying this on the floor. If there's anything.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you.
Yep, Representative Duncan, do you have a question on this bill?
Not a question, but a comment, please, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm an aye on this bill because it's tried several times to get to the floor. However, I just want to make a statement that I would have thought, I'm very disappointed, and I would have thought at this point, after all the work and fighting and infighting and back and forth, that the parties that came together would have been a little more cohesive and worked it out. I was very disappointed in how antagonistic it was. So I just hope that things settle down and they can work together, because they both bring a very important aspect in their own lanes to communities at whole. And it's really disappointing to see that there's still, after all this time, still this amount of fighting. So I just wanted to put it out there publicly that I should hope that anyone watching that things settle down before we hit the floor.
True. And I would say, actually, I was somewhat impressed from what I was expecting, knowing the process this bill's been through, and those of us who were in session, one vote here, one vote there, and there's been a lot of difficulty over the years. So I actually was rather impressed. It didn't get too out of hand, but yeah, it's an emotional issue for a lot of people and their patients, and what they have trained to do in their lives and how they hope to impact patients for the better. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, you have some closing thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I do, and I want to thank Representative Duncan for bringing that up. I don't like people throwing stones at people. I don't care which side of the issue you're on. It's just not kind of built into me. And so, I was disappointed as well. And I think those people that have said things, probably understand that now. It's just not how we should conduct business in Wyoming, and particularly in the legislature. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you. So with that committee, we will move the sewer transfer bill over to session. Anyone else have any last comments or thoughts before we adjourn for today? And I see you all next Monday. I'm not seeing any, so appreciate your time this afternoon. Sorry again, Representative Sweeney, we did not get to your bill. The good Speaker Pro Tem and caucus leader scheduled caucus this evening on short notice. So in trying to make it work for everybody in the legislature, at least in my party, we're going to recess or adjourn at 5. Representative Blackburn, do you have a question?
A comment, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Don't you have something going on this evening that maybe we want to look at?
Oh, in committee, if you're bored after caucus, Senator McCohen from Gillette and I and several other people will be on a 2-hour discussion on taxes. It's been highly promoted down in my county, but Braver Angels, a national organization, got Dr. Godby and Ashley from the taxpayers together, and we'll be talking about the pros and cons of tax policy and what Wyoming can do to get us out of our current cycle, if anything, and yeah, if you're bored after caucus, it's on braverangels.com. You can find a link or let me know. You can listen to more tax stuff. But yes, please join in if you have one or more legislature in one day. With that,
Mr.
Representative Duncan.
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, since you brought it up, tomorrow evening from 4 to 6 locally in Goshen County, as well as it will be live streamed on my political Facebook page. Ashley Harpstreet with the Wyoming Taxpayers Association and the Wyoming Business Council both will be teaming up here in Goshen County discussing the tax structure and policies and the effects of the 2021 session and budget, and as well as Wyoming Business Council will be addressing opportunities and economic diversity and potential solutions that we can come up with. So there you have it.
Goshen County, all moving and shaking. All right. Well, everyone else have an enjoyable weekend, and we will close the meeting. Oh, Representative